Is there anything more beautiful, awe-inspiring, and outright terrifying than nature? As human beings, we like to feel like we're top of the food chain, we're in control of our environment. But of course, we are but one of over 8 million different species that live on this planet. We are a tiny minority. We've talked a lot on this podcast over the last 9 seasons about movies in which human beings do unspeakable things to each other, and with good reason. Over 400,000 people per year are killed by other people. But it's perhaps easy to forget that over 1 million people per year are killed by animals, from the largest beasts to the tiniest insects. Over 500 people per year are mauled to death by hippos. Over 1,000 people per year are killed by crocodiles. Over 130,000 people per year are killed by venomous snakes. And over 1 million people per year are killed by what is statistically the deadliest living creature on Earth, the mosquito. And then there are people killed by nature more generally. 10 to 20,000 people per year are killed in natural disasters such as earthquakes and cyclones, and an estimated 250,000 people per year die by drowning in seas and oceans. And these sorts of numbers are only going to increase. Global warming and climate change could prove to be humanity's ultimate threat, our biggest nemesis of all. In short, planet Earth is fucking terrifying and something not to be messed with. And maybe that's why the horror genre has had such a long, popular and celebrated tradition of films that deal with the horrors of nature.
They're coming! They're coming!
This series will be looking at the evolution of horror movies that focus on nature biting back. We'll begin by looking at the fantasy sci-fi horror films of the 30s and 40s about giant beasts that represent both the wonder and the might of nature. Films like Godzilla and, of course, King Kong. We'll then move on to some of the most iconic animal attack movies of all time from the 60s and 70s, like Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds and Steven Spielberg's Jaws.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
And the wave of animal attack movies that followed, from The Swarm to Orca to Frogs to Piranha.
Piranha. They call them the devilfish.
We'll be looking at the wave of movies from around this time that depicted the dangers of the Australian outback, from Picnic at Hanging Rock to Long Weekend.
And every living creature, every blade of grass will turn against you.
We'll also be looking at some of the films that depict real-life encounters between humans and deadly animals, from Noel Marshall's bizarre and terrifying Roar to Werner Herzog's chilling and tragic Grizzly Man.
It's okay. You're the boss. Nice job. Wow, nice job.
Moving into the 90s, we'll be looking at the resurgence in natural disaster movies, from Volcano to Twister to The Day After Tomorrow.
Elusive, unpredictable, violent.
And finally, we'll be looking at what's become of this subgenre in the 2000s, from masterpieces like Neil Marshall's The Descent to bargain bin B-movies like Sharknado. And we'll be asking ourselves, in a time when our planet is in serious existential trouble, where do horror movies about nature go next?
What is that?
Join me for a brand new series of the evolution of horror as we explore what happens when nature bites back. just when you thought it was safe to go back into the water. Welcome to the evolution of horror. We're back. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre, one subgenre at a time. This is part 1 of our brand new 10th season, exploring, as that intro suggested, nature biting back in horror. I cannot wait. There's so much incredible stuff to cover this series, and what a lovely breath of fresh air, quite literally, this is going to be after our claustrophobic 2023, exploring the evolution of home invasion. So it's going to be a really fun series. I cannot wait to get into it. It's been a big old hiatus. We've been gone for a while. I've been busy these last few months. I went to America for a month. I launched a board game, Final Cut, which was successfully funded on Kickstarter. I also ran a 24-hour charity live stream and raised £10,000 for charity. So a lot's been going on. Thank you to all of you who have supported all of my various projects and ventures over the last few months. It's been a very, very busy time, and it's only going to get busier this year because we at Evolution of Horror HQ are expanding. We've got more exciting projects, more podcasts, and other things to announce. So stay tuned for that. And you may have also noticed that the Evolution of Horror has had a bit of a makeover. We've got some beautiful new artwork now for the podcast, all designed by our artist Mike Lee Graham. And if you head to our website, to our online shop, you'll find that we've dropped a whole bunch of new merch with beautiful new designs. Mike has basically kind of redesigned the artwork for every season of the podcast, for slashers, ghosts, folk horror, zombie, occult, etc. And you can now buy t-shirts and postcards and hoodies as well with that new artwork. And there is some absolutely beautiful stuff. It's been selling like absolute hotcakes since we dropped the new merch earlier this week. So I reckon it'll probably only be a few more days before we've completely sold out. So if you want to grab yourself a special limited edition EOH tee or hoodie or postcards, then head to our online store, evolutionofhorror.com/shop. I really, really love it, and it's hard to pick a favourite, but I think I particularly love the folk horror illustration. Mike's done this really kind of creepy design with this guy with kind of tree branches kind of coming out of him. It's very creepy. The vampire one is also beautiful, and the home invasion one as well, with this kind of smiling, sinister looking guy peering through a window. I mean, they're all absolutely beautiful. I've got the postcards on my wall actually, so I'm looking at them right now, and you can also grab a set of postcards with all of the artwork on, so you can have your own little collage up on the wall, and also grab yourself a tee. So get some merch while you can, evolutionofhorror.com/shop. So let's get into our new series, shall we? Because there is so much to cover this week. So this week, for part 1 of Nature Bites Back, it's going to work as ever as a little introduction episode. Later on in the episode, I will be joined by Freudian cinephile Mary Wild to discuss her thoughts on this subgenre. But first of all, we are going to run through the tropes and the conventions and give you a little potted history of the subgenre that we're going to be covering this series. And to do that, of course, I am joined by the encyclopedia of fantastic film and television, the guy that knows everything about genre movies and the history of genre movies, and joins me every series for our introductory chat. A big welcome back to Kevin Lyons. Hello, Kev.
Hello, nice to be here.
Lovely to have you here, Kev. We're here to talk about the great outdoors this year. Are you much of an outdoorsy person? Are you at one with nature, would you say?
No. I'd like to be. That my inner hippie demands that I go out and hug a tree and be all, at one with nature.
Yeah.
But, I was born in the suburbs of Birmingham. I've lived in London for the last nearly 30 years. I did spend some time on the Isle of Wight, which is very countrified. And I can't say, in fairness, I hated every minute of it, but most of them. So it's not me. My relationship with animals tends to be, I quite like them when they're behind a pane of glass. So if I can go to a zoo, if I can see them out the window, if I can watch them on television.
Yeah.
For the most part, with one or two exceptions, I'm not a great fan of them being in the room with me.
No.
You know what I mean? I'm just not, it's not me.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same, to be honest, Kev. I love animals. I love looking at animals from afar. I love appreciating animals on the internet. We all love a good cat video on the internet, and all of that kind of thing. But also, I kind of know not to not to fuck with nature too much.
Oh,
you know?
Absolutely. No, I mean, even a walk in the countryside fills me with utter dread sometimes, because you don't quite know what's out there, you know? It's like, I had a cat living here with me for a couple of years, and that was wonderful. I enjoyed that. I loved that.
Yeah.
I've had mice in this flat, and that terrified me.
Oh.
These things like an inch long, and I'm 6'6" when I stand up straight, and I was scared to death the whole time. These things, existential dread that nature, and particularly that part of nature, had intruded on my home.
Right.
And I didn't like it. I found it very, very uncomfortable.
I think that's what it is. I've had that too. I mean, we've probably, many of us who have lived in London have had that before, right? Where we have mice in our...
Yeah.
And I didn't think it would bother me as much as it did, but waking up in the night and hearing something scratching around somewhere in your room and you can't see it is such a horrible, unnerving thing. I just remember just lying there thinking, I can't sleep with that just going on somewhere in my room and I don't know where it is,
Exactly. I mean, we've done home invasions already. Yeah. And that's what this is.
It's a mouse home invasion.
It's a mouse. I can't think what the word is, the collective term for mice, but it's a mouse. A mouse home invasion. And they shouldn't be there. I've spoken about this a lot. That a lot of fear and a lot of horror comes from things being places where they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
In horror movies, sort of suddenly seeing something move in the background is much more terrifying than something leaping up in the foreground and shouting boo at you. And it's like that with me and animals. I don't know where they are and I don't know what they're thinking and I can't deal with them.
And I think there's that idea of a loss of control too, right? Particularly having a wild animal in your house or in your flat. God, I remember when I was a kid, a bird accidentally flew into our house. And for anyone who has had that happen to them, what a kind of blind panic that is, right? When a bird is indoors with you because the bird is panicking, everyone in the room is panicking. It's a nightmare.
I had that a few years ago because I'm an old man. I have to have a nap in the afternoons. When I had a nap, I came back in. There was a pigeon in my front room, and they're not the brightest of God's little sunbeams, are they?
No,
and so this thing had got in through the open balcony door. Do you think it could find its way back out again? There's me and it running around the front room chasing each other. I'd chase it, it would stop. I'd turn around and run away, and it came.
You're sort of running around with like a big sheet or something, just kind of like waft it. It's a horrible thing, but I think that's the thing. It's that idea of kind of. We like to think as human beings that we're top of the food chain, that we've got nature conquered, that we've got a control of our environment, right? And I think it's very clear, really, when you look at the state of the planet and where we're at, that we actually have very little control over what's going on, right?
Oh, absolutely. No, we have control over our actions, which are destroying the planet, but the planet will just go and do its own thing anyway.
Right.
And to be perfectly fair, I don't think we're going to destroy the planet. I think we're going to destroy ourselves, and the planet won't care because nature doesn't care.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things I think you're going to see a lot in this series, is nature doesn't care.
Yes.
It doesn't think. It doesn't calculate. It just does stuff.
Yes.
And if you happen to get in its way, then, tough shit, basically. You pay the price. And I think, if the human race died tomorrow, nature wouldn't care.
No.
It'd carry on. It'd be all right. It'd be okay.
Yeah.
We'd wipe ourselves out, but it would carry on quite happily without us. It just doesn't care about us.
Yeah, we're just another blip. It's like the dinosaurs, right? They came and they went and the world continued, right? And
the world carried on its merry way, exactly.
Yeah.
And that'll come for us one day. Hopefully not soon. I mean, I'm not looking for it to happen this weekend.
Sometimes it feels pretty imminent, doesn't it? But hopefully not for a long time, I think you're absolutely right about that. And I think that is something that makes this very unique when we talk about this in terms of horror movies. We talked about home invasion, one of the nastiest, kind of most malicious kind of subgenres, really, in a way. And serial killers will do what they do, monsters, vampires, whatever, will do what they do in movies. There's something about animals, like you say, where there's no morality attached, really.
No, not at all.
Cujo, bless him, he can't help what he's up to, I don't know whether that makes it more scary in a way, because there's no reasoning with nature and animals, right? They are going to do what they're going to do, and there's no getting out of it,
That's absolutely right. And just by chance, this afternoon, before recording this, I watched The Birds again.
Oh.
And we'll touch on this more as we go along. I'm sure it is one of the great touchstones of this genre.
We will.
But in that, you've got this species of animal or wildlife, the birds, they're not anthropomorphized in any way.
No.
They're not like, sort of some of the other monsters are a bit, you can sort of see a bit of a human behavior in them.
Yes.
The birds, they just attack people.
Yeah.
There's no real, we never find out why they do it.
No.
And that's what makes it so terrifying, because we can't communicate with them. We can't reason with them. We can't bargain with them. We can't plead for our lives with a flock of birds. They're just going to do what they're going to do. And that's it. Like I say, it's nature. If you're in the way, well, bad luck.
That incredible final shot of the birds when they're walking out of the house is so good, isn't it? Because I think that really sums up that idea of, what are these birds doing now? Have they stopped? Are they just biding their time? Like, we have no idea why they're doing what they're doing and why they may or may not attack at any given time. And that makes every second of that film absolutely terrifying, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, like most animals, they're completely inscrutable. Yeah. You can look an animal in the eye, and it can be the cutest animal in the world. It could be a cat. It could be a dog. And you're not entirely sure what it's thinking. Yeah. You could be looking at you all sort of adoringly and then try and rip your face off the next second because you've just annoyed it, And so there's no way of really knowing what's going on behind those eyes. And the more wild the animal becomes, I have a trio of pigeons who have made a little nest on my windowsill. And they'll sit there and they'll peer in the window at me. And we make eye contact. And I've no idea what's going on. Yeah. Probably nothing. It's a pigeon. I mean, there's probably not a lot going on between those ears at all. But we don't have any point of contact with each other. If someone breaks into your house, you can plead for your life.
Exactly.
You can't plead for your life with a flock of birds or a shark or a giant ape or any of that stuff. It's just pot luck that you survive.
Absolutely. And you're right. I think it's interesting what you said there about, birds aren't necessarily the kind of cute cats or dogs. And I think that's another really interesting thing about human psychology, isn't it? That we have like a hierarchy of animals that we love more than others, right?
Yes.
Cats and dogs right up there, of course.
Absolutely. Yep.
Spiders, snakes down the bottom, I would say. Like, often we will see it over and over again. These are the animals. Sharks, of course. Yep. These are the animals that we are perhaps a bit harshly, absolutely terrified of, and most of us hate, right?
Absolutely.
It's so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of cases, particularly with the shark, we've got absolutely nothing to worry about whatsoever, really. We have in films, and, films exist in an entirely different reality to where we live. Yeah. The amount of people who are actually eaten by a shark every year, more people get killed being run over by a car.
Absolutely.
And yet we're terrified of sharks. We won't go in the water in case there's a shark. You've just crossed a main road to get to the beach. You've taken your life into your hands just getting here, Yeah,
you're absolutely right. You're so right about that. And I think, and spiders, yes, maybe in Australia they can kill you, but here, there's absolutely no rational reason for us to hate spiders or be scared of spiders. But yet there is something psychologically in our brains that looks at a spider and goes, nope, that should not be in the same space as us,
I'm generally okay with spiders, but I was lying in bed last night watching something or other. I can't remember what I was watching. And out the corner of my eye, I caught a movement. And coming up behind the radiator, there's a spider. Mm-hmm. It's about half an inch across, these things. They're not huge. And even me, who's not that bothered by spiders, I still sort of flinched a little bit.
Yes.
When I saw it. It's almost like there's this kind of inbuilt mechanism that we have, that we see these things and we just automatically go, oh. Yes. And then we think, oh, look at it. It's like it's half an inch across and it's moving very, very slowly. And I was fine until I went back to whatever it was I was watching, looked up to see what it was doing, and it was gone.
Oh, no.
That was when it started to get scary. Where is it? Is it going to crawl across me while I'm asleep tonight? Yes. Where's it gone? Sometimes with animals, I find that it's the absence of an animal, certainly from your sight, that makes them scary. Something like, sharks, for example, we don't see them until, in films at least, we don't see them till it's too late.
Absolutely. And,
it's their sort of absence more than their presence in a lot of ways that is terrifying.
That's so true, isn't it? It's, I think that's why insects, small things are scary because they could be anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And things that are under the sea or under the ocean are all terrifying because it's like you're going to feel them before you can see them. There's something about that, isn't there? About not knowing if you're swimming about in the sea. And I don't like to do that very often because I think, well, at any point my leg could brush up against a jellyfish or something. I'm not going to see it. That is a worrying thing, isn't it?
Like I said, I used to live on the Isle of Wight, so I quite often catch a ferry across to the mainland. And this is just the Solent. This is just a strip of water that's it's everybody knows about the Solent that lives down there. But quite often you just look out the window of the boat or the catamaran or whatever and think, what is down there?
Yeah.
It's just this murky depth. I've no idea what's down there. It could be nothing. It could be, some shoal of cod. It could be a, jellyfish. It could be the Cloverfield monster. I don't know. There could be anything down. And that's what makes it so scary, I think.
Yes. And of course, I think there's something probably fairly obvious psychologically in that the animals that are closer to us, we probably prefer, right? Or at least ones that have, two eyes, big eyes, look at puppies, look at kittens. Yeah. Whereas, spiders have multiple eyes, multiple legs. Yeah. Things that you see under the ocean look like aliens, right? I.e. aliens that we've created look like things under the sea. So there's something about that, isn't there, as well, obviously, that the creatures that are further from us, we find slightly more unnerving and scary, for sure, I've
always said that the really scary thing about the facehugger in the Alien films is it's very clever because it's part spider, part rat.
Right.
You've got the rat's tail and you've got the spider's body and legs. Mm-hmm. And it's two of the things that strike absolute terror into us.
Yeah.
And then it is in one creature.
Yes.
And that has no eyes. And that's why the grown-up alien is terrifying because, as you said, anything with big eyes, we think, oh, that's cute, that's lovely. That hasn't got any eyes.
No.
How can he see us? How does he know where we are? Oh my God! It's really scary.
You're so right. I mean, we talked about that together, didn't we? About how the xenomorph is just like they say in the film, it is the perfect organism because
that's right,
the way it was designed, it's like every element of that design is it taps into something real, and most of it is animal related, right? You're absolutely right. And I think for me, the facehugger always was scarier than the fully grown xenomorph because it was more scuttly and fast and small, like all of those animals we've just been discussing.
Even the adult is insectoid, isn't it?
Yes.
It drips sort of ooze and sort of all the nasty things we associate with the animals we don't like. We'll pick up a kitten, we'll pick up a puppy, we'll give them a hug and we'll have a good time with them. You're not going to do that with, like you say, some of those things you find under the sea. There's a worm that sort of fires like these snot tendrils out of its nose and sort of like, if you just like, who designed that and why?
Well, this is the thing, right? We storytellers, filmmakers have always forever created incredible fictional monsters. Tentacles and fangs and sharp teeth and snarling and acid blood, whatever. And you think, actually, we don't need to make these things up. Half of them live on this planet, right? They really do. There's a wasp somewhere, isn't there, in the Amazon that can lay eggs in its prey.
I was going to say that's where they got the thing for Alien from. That's what it was. They planned. I think it's in the brain, isn't it, or in the head? That they
and they can control its prey. It's like a parasite.
They turn them into like zombie sort of, like machines. Basically, they just steer them around. Really, honestly, nature is horrible. I'm sorry, nature lovers. Nature is big things eating and killing little things, and it's just plants practice chemical warfare on each other. It's horrible out there. We romanticize it, I think, because we've kind of lost touch with nature because predominantly we are sort of urban dwellers. Even if you live in the countryside, you tend to live in a town. There are very, very few small communities left, and I think because we've lost touch with nature, we slightly over romanticize it. It's nowhere near as nice and wonderful as we like to think it is.
No,
which is why this genre of film works so well.
So well, right? I mean, what do you think of it as a subgenre, Kev? Because it does seem to be one that remains incredibly popular when you think all the way back to movies like Jaws and The Birds and everything we've had since. Are you a fan generally? Would you gravitate towards these types of kind of animal attack movies, I suppose?
I do like them very much, for the reasons that we've been discussing. That, we would like to think, if Michael Myers came in, we could probably have a chance of sort of trying to reason with him. And sort of much more macho blokes than me would say, I'd wrestle him to the ground and all that sort of stuff. Good luck with doing that with a giant ape or a shark or a spider on its own is fine. You've got 200 of them crawling towards you. This is all pretty scary stuff. And like I say, because we can't plead for our lives with nature. It makes us all the more vulnerable.
Yeah, you're right, actually. I think there's something about this subgenre that I do find quite stressful, actually. Sometimes more so than a home invasion or something, because
I think like often they are these kind of very high concepts, like very stressful. I think of films like Open Water, where it's just two people floating in the ocean surrounded by sharks. And you go, well, what would you do in that situation? What on earth would you do? Like there are so many horror... What could you do? Yeah, there are so many horror movies, like you say, where we watch, idiot victims in slasher films, and we go, oh, well, that person was an idiot. I would have done this and I would have been fine. Sure. Whereas actually, you watch these people in movies like Jaws or Crawl, and you're like, well, yeah, I would be absolutely screwed if I was there,
of course,
I think,
I mean, I'm quite a large person. I'm 6'6". I'm not particularly sort of, and all the rest of it, but I'm 6'6". But if I'm faced with, it's a 10-foot long shark,
yes,
forget it. I mean, I wouldn't be, because I'm terrified of water, so I'm not getting in there with them. But you take my point. What could we do about that? Yeah. Even a dog. If a dog attacked someone my size, what could I do about it?
Yeah.
If it was a Chihuahua, that'd be fine. But if you're being attacked by a St. Bernard or a German Shepherd or something,
oh God,
you've got no defense against that. So you suddenly realise just how defenseless we are in the face of nature.
Yes.
When you hear stories of people being attacked by dogs.
Yeah.
And I'm firmly of the belief that dogs attack people because they've been tormented or they've been provoked into it, But you hear that they've been attacked, and you do think, what can you do to stop that?
It's actually, we've talked about how, so many of these movies are about the animals that we all consider very frightening. Yeah. Sharks, spiders, snakes. We'll come across a lot of those. But there's something also about the way in which horror films subvert the cute, innocent animals, right? The birds is one, actually, because birds we all see every day. They're very mundane, right?
Yep.
Dogs, films like Cujo or White Dog or whatever, they are scary because they're animals that they're supposed to be man's best friend, right?
That's right.
And there's subverting those.
There's an added layer, I think, when you're doing things like cats and dogs and whatever, that you don't want Cujo to die.
No.
You don't want anything to happen to Cujo, although he's a monster.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you still, that part of you, they're still feeling very protective towards this dog. So there's a kind of, you don't tend to feel protective about sharks.
No.
It's like, before I realised I was terrified of water, I wanted to be a marine biologist.
Oh, wow.
And at school, I bunked off most of my lessons and sat in the library reading all the books about sharks because I was fascinated by them. But if it's me or a shark,
yes.
See you, mate. Bye.
Yes, exactly.
Bye. A cat or a dog, I might take a bullet for a cat or a dog because they're cute and they're lovely. But and it's like you say about this hierarchy, isn't it? That sort of some things we feel more attached to,
absolutely,
than others.
And cats are fascinating animals, aren't they? In fiction, in culture, in a history. We used to worship cats. Well, some cultures used to worship cats like they were gods, And
I think we still do, to be honest.
Yes.
I think the cats believe we still do, that's for sure.
Yes, I know. It's so interesting. It still makes up, like I've already mentioned, about 99% of the internet, I think, is cats.
Yeah.
And we all love cats, and they are adorable, and I love them as well. But also, you think they probably don't give a shit about us, do they, cats? Like they look at us like we are subservient. It's so
I
interesting.
often said when my niece was living with me with her cat, Albert, and me and Albert, we bonded. Yeah. Fantastic. In fact, I think we've done a few of these recordings where Albert's been walking up and down my desk.
Made cameos.
Exactly. And, we got on so well, sort of took away all my sort of, I used to believe that cats were the kind of animals that walked into a room, looked you up and down and thought, no food, I'm off then. And that's it. But no, he's very affectionate, very lovely. But I often joked that if I was to keel over and die, 3 days before he started eating me, because there was no food,
Yes.
I think he feels something for me. When I see him now, he's still very excited when I see him. But, if he was like, oh, well, I'm hungry, Uncle Kev will have to do.
I know.
I don't think he would have too many qualms about that because they think in a very different way to humans do.
That's right. It's so, and I think that's what it is, isn't it? Is that we never quite know really what's going on, and that we love to anthropomorphize all creatures. We all do when we have pets and everything else. We imprint personalities onto animals when actually we have absolutely no idea like what nature is doing and why it's doing it often, So.
I used to wake up in the night, as I often do, being an old man. I wake up in the night and Albert the cat would be sitting in the middle of the bedroom floor staring at me.
Oh, no.
Not moving, just staring at me. It's like, you've seen me all day. What's going on? What do you want? And it was really disconcerting because I couldn't work out what he was thinking.
Yes.
He was lovely. In the morning I'd come in, you have cuddles and all the rest of it. But in the middle of the night when he's just staring at you, and you're thinking, What's going on inside that tiny little brain of his? There's those two brain cells that cats possess. Have they finally hit each other and connected? He's made a thought, I'm going to eat Uncle Kev.
Well, and do you know what? There's also, that's made me think of something else as well, which is the same can be said of very young children sometimes,
yes,
I think, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't got children, but many of my friends do, and they say there is always a slight disconcerting moment sometimes if you've got a toddler and you wake up in the night and that toddler is just stood by your bed watching you or whatever, right? As kids might just naturally do. And and I think that's another thing, you know, we're not touching upon it too much, but we are going to dip into a few films like Who Can Kill a Child, The Children, these movies where, again, it kind of takes a similar vibe to a film like The Birds, where you go, oh my God, what would happen if children suddenly turned on us as well, right?
That's right.
And that's another really interesting twist.
Children. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And a brilliant film with children instead of birds. If no one see Would You Kill a Child, stop listening to this nonsense. I say that every episode, and Mike sort of sternly looks at me like, no, don't stop listening. But go and watch that film. It's a quite extraordinary film.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. But there is also something sort of unnerving and uncanny about children in horror films, right? As well.
Yeah. Well, you put a child or an animal into a horror film, and I think you've almost certainly got some kind of a hit.
Yes.
Because I think, you know, there are two things that we allow, in inverted commas, into our homes. And we love, we cherish, and we bring them up, and we nurture them and feed them. And we still don't understand them.
No.
We still don't understand what's going on behind those eyes. You know, those cute eyes that children and cats and dogs have. What's really going on behind them?
Right.
And filmmakers exploit that brilliantly sometimes.
So well. This is something that, you know, Mary Wilde will talk a little bit about later on in this episode, actually, as well, about how, you know, children are in some ways, you know, before your kind of frontal cortex has kind of developed a bit more, you are a bit more, you go with your prime instincts. You want to eat, you want to sleep, you want to whatever. And there is something almost a little bit more kind of primal or animalistic about children than there are adults who have kind of grown into civilization, right? You know, they're that much further away from civilization.
In some ways, babies need to be socialized.
Yes.
Because when they're sort of, you know, when they're little, they have no idea what's going on. They were in this nice, you know, warm, sort of liquidy environment for 9 months, and then suddenly they're out in the cold and the light, and it's there. And I can imagine that, you know, if they had the strength and the wherewithal, they'd rip someone's face off.
Yes.
I mean, who wouldn't? You just come out to the world, and it's a very scary place, right? I mean, that's why something like, you know, the film It's Alive works so well. Because that's exactly what happens. The babies come out and they just go on the rampage almost immediately, you know, killing the delivery team in the delivery room. It just, there's no hanging about. They just do it because these are children that are never going to be socialized.
Yeah.
You know, and that's fantastic. Such a good film.
Norman Bates is judged, restored to sanity, and is ordered released forthwith.
It's 22 years later, and Norman Bates is coming home.
I own a motel not too far from here, and you'd be welcome to spend the night in one of the empty rooms if you'd like.
Good night, Mary. And he's back in business.
That was a little clip you heard just there from Psycho 2, one of the most underrated horror or slasher sequels out there, I think. A movie that I have been wanting to cover on the podcast for a very long time, and over on Patreon, I finally got my chance. We are running a little Psycho retrospective, and across 2 episodes, we are covering all 4 of the movies in the Psycho franchise, from Alfred Hitchcock's classic 1960 original through to Psycho 4 The Beginning in 1990. And the brilliant Stacey Ponder is joining me to discuss all 4 Psycho movies in depth. That is available at the moment for $10 patrons, as well as a whole bunch of other bonus episodes. While we were on hiatus, we brought listeners of the Patreon channel a whole bunch of weekly episodes, including a Ghostbusters retrospective, an Oscars mini-season, a whole bunch of other stuff. Fresh Blood is still running on a monthly basis, in which we review all of the new releases in horror. This month, a brand new 4th co-host, Steph McKenna, joins us to cover everything from Abigail to Alex Garland's Civil War to Luca Guadagnino's Challengers. It's a really, really fun month. So if you want to get access to all of this bonus content, there's so much to dip into, you need to sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/evolution of horror. $5 per month will get you access to regular bonus episodes, a back catalogue of over 200 bonus episodes, but $10 per month will get you access to absolutely everything, including our exclusive mini-seasons, meaning you will get a new episode dropping every single week. Just head to patreon.com/evolution of horror. And don't forget, everybody who signs up to our Patreon, no matter what tier, will also get a little shout out on the podcast as a thank you. So I've got lots of people to thank for the last few months. I'm going to do this, I'm going to stagger the thank yous, but I'm going to begin by thanking all of the people that signed up in the month of January. So a big thank you to Marius Holman Penny, Arf, Jessica Hoover, Becky Buck, Kevin Pantony, Robin Wyman, Laura, Lindsay McVeigh, Caroline Rutherford, Nicole Bryan, Stephen Maldonado, Paul Ormiston, Cameron McNutt, Greg Feinberg, Jamie Thorne, Benjamin Bayer, Gavin Thomas, Joel Grandmont, Willow, Brian Callahan, Amanda James, Tico Polido, Amanda, John Lawton, Tetzel, Alec, We Rach 27, Max Byland, Elizabeth Bishop, Nicole Kelly, Claire, Simon Sharples, Leah Stone, Rebecca Kay, Grant Campbell, Ariane Carrara, Cuthbert Jess, Holly Cohen, Amy DeZella, Philippa James, Danielle Krizik, Sleep Terminal, Zach Paustian, Caffeine Unicorn, Liam Cox, AE, John Thrasher Thiel, Michelle Tokarski, Brianna Bass, Michelle Gallagher, Christina Satley, Victoria James, Bethany Fincher, JR the Hiker Bear, Lizzie C, Mike Farmer, Holly Bunn, Daniel McCabe, Vanessa V, Cameron Lako Sola, Matt Shepard, Bridal, Joshua Powell, Kirsten452, Richard Mee, Mark Bullman, Emily Bauer, Monkey Maniac, Caitlin Kavanagh, Matthew Charlton, Emma Karscadden, B, Jacob, Jeremy Johnston, Dr. Neer, Mark Holland, and Joshua McCruvey. A huge thank you to all of those people for signing up to our Patreon in the month of January. And one more time, if you want to join them, get treated to regular bonus episodes, get a little shout out on the podcast, and get a whole bunch of other treats, then sign up now. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. That's patreon.com/evolution of horror. And so, as we mentioned, there has been this great tradition of horror movies. They're a fun subgenre. That's the other thing, right? I think, last year we talked a lot about home invasion, and a lot of people sort of went, home invasion, not the most fun to sit down and watch necessarily. Whereas I think there's something just very fun, isn't there, about this subgenre? No matter how scary or stressful, people will always, to this day, they still do very well, will still flock to the cinema to go watch the latest shark movie, alligator movie, whatever it might be. They are quite crowd-pleasing movies, aren't they? They are, and much as I love them both, if I was going to watch a film tonight, Friday night, we're recording this, I would go and watch Jaws over Funny Games any day of the week, but particularly on a Friday night after a long week, because although Jaws is terrifying, it's kind of fun terrifying. Yes. Funny Games is terrifying, but it's kind of a different, it's too, if you'll pardon the pun, it's too close to home. Yeah. It's too real. Do you think it also has a link, and we'll go specifically in a bit, but do you think specifically this subgenre, it feels to me like it does have a bit of a link with sort of B movies as well, and I don't mean Bumblebee movies, although maybe, but when I think of, even thinking of the titles like Frogs and Slugs and Tarantula, Sharknado, I don't know, there's also something about them that feels more, apart from some of the masterpieces we've talked about, like The Birds and Jaws, there's something about them that feels more lowbrow, I think, in a weird way. Do you know what I mean? I think The Birds and Jaws, they're very few and far between at that level of filmmaking. Yeah. If you're going to make a film about a giant spider on the rampage, I'm sorry, you can't shoot it as if it was Fellini. You're not going to win an Academy Award, are you? You're not. No. You've just got to acknowledge that this is the most ludicrous thing you've come up with this week and just go with it and just hope for the best, really.
But and you know, and it works. I mean, it absolutely does work. Can you imagine if they treated films like Tarantula and The Black Scorpion and things like that as if they treated them as very serious, heavyweight sort of psychological dramas about the human condition and all the rest of it? They'd be unwatchable. You know, we don't want that. We want, you know, optically enlarged insects rampaging about, squashing people. That's right. What we're there for.
That's
right.
A lot of optical. I suppose that's the other reason maybe why they have sometimes a bit of a double feature cheap B-movie sensibility, is that it's often like people in rubber suits or it's, you know, slightly clunky effects and that kind of thing, isn't it, I think?
It is, yeah. And that is so much a part of their charm.
Yeah.
There's almost this sort of running battle between the filmmaker and the audience. How much can I get away with here and they'll still buy it?
Yes.
You know, if the effects don't have to be brilliant, let's face it, the effects in The Birds.
No. And of course, famously in Jaws, they were terrible,
Jaws,
right?
I mean, that shark, you know, much as I adore Jaws, one of my top 5 films ever.
Yeah.
As soon as the shark appears, there has that little bit of you that dies inside because you're thinking, this is such a brilliant film, and look, there's a big rubber shark.
Yes.
You know? But it's down to the skill of the directors. You know, we think like The Birds and Jaws, they have 2 of the greatest special effects ever.
Yes.
Hitchcock and Spielberg at their prime.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what makes it. Hitchcock will sell you that attack on the school in The Birds, even though there's fringing all around the birds when they're attacking. You don't notice because you're so scared.
Yeah.
Because you spend a long time building up to that with them, you know, gathering outside on the climbing frame, and then, you know, the panic and then the fleeing and all the rest of it. That by the time all that's happening, you're not noticing a few dodgy effects.
Exactly.
You're just too busy screaming, basically. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's right. And so it takes an accomplished filmmaker, because that is a very, very difficult thing with these movies, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest hurdle, is how do you create a realistic looking Cujo that's attacking and biting people without actually using a dog and mistreating an animal or mistreating humans by letting them get bit by animals. And it's really only, I would say, the last very few years where we might get actual realistic looking animals attacking people. Do you know what I mean? So filmmakers have always had to come up with other ways to create these types of horror movies, haven't they?
I think basically they have to make a decision very early on in production. Are we going to do this like Jaws? Are we going to do this like The Birds? Or, you know, have we got 30p and, you know, a tailwind behind us and that's all we've got going for us? Okay, let's make Sharknado instead.
Yeah.
You know, and I think there's nothing wrong with either of those approaches, to be honest. No. You know, I love the first Sharknado film. The sequels I'm not so much fussed about, but the first film, I mean, I don't think I've ever laughed quite so hard as a film, to be honest. But it's a glorious, glorious film. But, you know, I think they have to make that decision very early on. How are we going to do this? Are we going to be serious?
Yes.
Or are we just going to have a bit of fun?
Exactly.
You know, it's a tough call.
It is. So it's a fascinating subgenre in that regard, I think. So let's have a little go back. And before we start at the beginning in terms of cinema, does this go back pre-cinema in any way, Kev? Like literature, theatre, anything like that? I mean, the only text I could think of in my brain was something like Moby Dick or Robinson Crusoe or something, right? This idea of kind of stories about explorers and that kind of thing.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. It doesn't feature much in literature. I think, you know, you got things like Murders in the Rue Morgue and Balao, but they're a different thing. I think that's what we need to sort of establish now at this point. We should have established earlier, really, that I think what you're looking at here, correct me if I'm wrong, is films in which animals act under their own agency.
Yes, absolutely.
These films are being, you know, animals being used as murder weapons. They're being directed by human hand. Other than that, I can only think of maybe The Lost World.
Yeah.
And I think maybe it's been a long, long time since I read them. I was a kid, but the Tarzan books, maybe. I think some of those have got sort of, you know, scarier moments in them. But generally, no, I think this sort of whole idea of nature coming to get us has been largely a cinematic thing. And I think that's largely because when cinema came along, we were just starting to lose that touch with nature.
Mm-hmm.
The whole move into the cities was starting to happen.
Yes.
And so, you know, film took over. We have had, you know, the Sean Hudson books, with crabs and things like that, slugs and God knows what all else. But, you know, I think they're more a reaction to films than actually sort of like, let's start a literary strand of Nature Bites Back. I think they were looking at Jaws and thinking, what could we write about? The Rats, the Frank Herbert book. I think, I don't think he was thinking, I'm going to start a new literary strain here.
Yeah.
I'm going to channel what I've seen in the cinema.
Yeah.
And do it this way.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's something really interesting about that. And I think, the closest we get are those kind of stories. And that leads us into maybe one of the first major films I'm going to talk about. These stories about far off lands. It's The Lost World is the perfect example. It's kind of the air text in that regard, right? It's this kind of like... Yeah. This strange island that actually there are loads of like prehistoric creatures and things we've never seen before that are still, untouched by man almost, that are still living there.
That's right.
And I think, that's where that comes into it. And you're absolutely right. I'm very much trying to avoid for a later season, trying to avoid for now, the idea of kind of man messing with science and creating big, radioactive creatures or whatever. I think you're absolutely right. It's what I'm trying to do. 90%, let's say, of the films I'm covering this season are about creatures or the whatever the kind of antagonist is in the film, working of its own volition, like you say, like it's motivated by it's doing what it has always done, kind of thing.
Yes, it's survival instinct rather than rather than being hypnotized or drugged into going and kidnapping a woman that the bad guy fancies or something you used to see in the old films. These films, I think, that we're talking about here, they are films in which the animals just do their thing, either to survive or because they've had enough of us, frankly. And
very often the moral of these stories is, aren't human beings idiots for messing with these things?
Oh,
right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think virtually every film that you're going to cover here has got an element of that, sort of people bringing things back from places and putting them in New York.
Well...
Were you mad? What's the matter with you?
Exactly. And so that leads us nicely into the first movie we're going to talk about next week. I'm going to be joined by James Swanton to discuss in depth, and there's going to be so much to talk about. King Kong from 1933. What a movie, right?
To be perfectly honest, if we just started with everything begins and ends with King Kong, we could have cut this a lot shorter, to be honest. But
it's so good.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
It's a perfect film. I've said this to people before so many times in the past that I still find it staggering that even now at my advanced old years, that, a little model made of bits of like rabbit fur and armature will make me cry.
Yes.
In a way that none of the remakes or, sequels or whatever have ever done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This one, there's just something beautiful about this film, which is really hard to put into words. It's one of those things that you'll watch it, you'll just be moved by it in a way that you probably don't expect. If you've never seen it, the first time you watch it, I think you'll be surprised how moved you are.
I agree. I found it a profoundly moving experience watching it the other day, because not only is it moving because the story itself is moving and what happens to King Kong, but the filmmaking is so good. And, there's something about practical effects that are 100 years old that are more impressive than looking at the special effects that are, present. Do you know what I mean? Like, how on earth did they pull off all of the stuff that they pulled off,
There's a shot in the film where they're in a cave.
Yeah.
And, you see the two humans down the bottom of the screen, and Kong is up here fighting something or other, snake, I think it is, if I remember right. And there's about 7 elements or something.
Right, exactly.
5, 6, 7 elements in this.
Yeah.
And you just look at it, you think, this film's even older than I am. And that's saying something. I mean, this film is 1933.
Yeah. Yeah, it's coming up to 100 years old.
Yeah. And it still looks stunning. That sequence still, every single time it comes on, still takes my breath away.
That's unbelievable.
Just watch it, you think, how on earth? Because we do tend to think, in the past, they were nowhere near as, as advanced and as civilized and as, smart as we are. But I've got to tell you, in 1933, when it came to special effects, they were running rings around anything that's being done now.
Yeah.
Strangely enough, just a few days ago, I gave one of my periodic attempts to see if I could understand why people love Star Wars so much. Gave it another go. And it was the director's cut.
Yes.
And all the way through, I was being completely distracted by the fact that the CGI from, 20 years ago looks far worse and more dated than any of the fantastic practical effects from the 1970s. That's the bit that was dating the film, not the practical effects.
Yeah.
And it's the same with Kong. I look at one or two of the remakes, and I think you are very much of your time.
Absolutely.
1933 is timeless.
Yeah, I think it is. You're absolutely right. And, and I think also, like you mentioned, you could almost begin and end with this movie because it so perfectly encapsulates everything that I kind of want to explore this season too. Like the story of this kind of arrogant filmmaker going to this place, experiencing the horrors of this island, and then kind of, kidnapping this creature that we look at with such kind of wonder and awe, and then bringing it back to New York, putting it on display, and absolute, chaos kind of ensuing. It's like that is exactly like the kind of trajectory of every movie, like you say, we're going to explore this series, really, of kind of people messing with nature and nature taking no prisoners, basically.
I think of all the monsters you're going to look at in this series, Carl Denham is one of the worst.
Yeah.
I think he's awful. This is a man who goes to this place, exploits the locals. Then he sort of sees Kong doing appalling things to people because it's frightened and it's been aggravated and all the rest of it. And his first thought is, I know, I'll take this back to one of the biggest cities in the world and make some money out of it.
Yeah.
At the end of the film, the famous last lines in the film, it was beauty killed the beast.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't, you arrogant shit. It was you. You killed the beast. If you'd left it alone where it belonged, it would still be alive. Kong would still live. But no, because you could just see dollar signs, you had to drag this poor monster halfway across the world.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he went a bit nuts. What was he supposed to do?
Yeah, it's so true, actually. Yeah, that really is, it's a bit much, isn't it? He's basically blaming Fay Ray, and it's like, it's not her fault.
It's not her fault. I mean, for God's sake, Fay Ray did not want to bring Kong back to New York. He's a horrible monster, is Carl Denham. He's a loathsome character in so many ways.
And another great fictional character that doesn't get on particularly well with King Kong, Kev, Godzilla. Godzilla, and another big monster, and again, obviously, when we talk about Kong and Godzilla, these aren't real animals, of course, but I think what's really interesting about them is that they are kind of, in the worlds of these stories, they are natural inhabitants of the earth, right? That people mess with. And again, Godzilla, what an astonishing film, right? And such a brilliant, overt kind of message of look at the horrors that man, creates, essentially.
If people have only ever watched some of the later Godzilla films, and I adore them, even the lesser ones are a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But if you've only seen things like King Kong versus Godzilla or Destroy All Monsters, they're great fun.
Yeah.
But the first Godzilla film
different. Yeah.
is a whole different kettle of fish. It's very dark. It's got this message about, the Japanese fear of the bomb.
Yes.
They're the only people who have ever lost a nuclear war.
Yeah.
And so, they have these sort of national dread, or did certainly in the 1950s, of nuclear power.
Well, it was astonishingly recent, wasn't it? When Godzilla was made, it was less than a decade since, Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
It was nine years since they'd been bombed. Yeah. It was just really, it was and there were all those nuclear tests, the Americans setting off bombs at Bikini Atoll and places like that.
Yeah.
Of course, they didn't do them on their doorstep.
No.
They didn't do them off Hawaii. They took them to the other side of the world and sort of started letting them off. And, the opening scene of Godzilla with the fishing boat was actually based on a true story. It was based on a ship that had gone through
That's right.
one of these areas, and the people on there had become irradiated because of their exposure to the fallout.
Yeah.
And so it was all very, very real. And it's a very different film to what comes later. What comes later are fantastic fun.
Yes.
They are so much fun. But that first film, a totally different kettle of fish.
Very different. It's got a real tone of kind of sadness and more. There's something mournful about it, isn't there? Because it is this kind of that it is this comment on all the atrocities that they had suffered, and it's that also an astonishing film, right? And an amazing companion to King Kong in a lot of ways. This kind of the American versus the Japanese take on the giant monster attacking the city.
Yeah, exactly. They're coming from totally different directions, obviously, because the Americans were the guys who were throwing the nukes about.
Yeah.
And so they weren't too worried about it. But the Japanese being on the receiving end of it, they make their giant monster radioactive. The American one is this sort of creature from, quote unquote, the third world, who's basically coming to take our women.
Yes.
And this was a concurrent thing. Ran all the way through the 1930s, 40s, and 50s of the outsider coming to take away our women.
Yeah.
That's what all the big, so alien invasion films were about, And this was a very real sort of fear, I think, for American, particularly male American audiences.
Yes.
And so, this was the two very different approaches, and they would meet on more than one occasion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I love Kong, but I still think Godzilla would probably win every time.
Yeah, I know. It's so funny. And we'll talk about this a little bit together in a few weeks, Kev, but
we will.
Obviously there was this huge then wave. I mean, Godzilla kind of created the giant monster, the kaiju movie genre, I suppose, right?
Yeah,
and Godzilla and Kong, like you said, countless films about the two of them, lots of crossovers where they went head to head against each other and everything. And are you a fan of the Kong Godzilla movies that followed?
I like the Japanese one. The current crop seems to have turned King Kong into a WWE wrestler, or whatever the abbreviation is. He's constantly scowling and flexing muscles and all the rest of it. And it's like, that's not my Kong. My Kong's a bit scared. My Kong's not sure of himself. This guy's sort of strutting about, he's got, I haven't seen the most recent one, but I believe he's got a bionic arm now, hasn't he? So, I mean, he's like, they've turned him into some kind of superhero, which doesn't really appeal to me as much as the original Kong. To be fair. But I can see why they're doing it, because these monsters, they've always been massively popular. The Americans make their Godzilla film, so the Japanese come along with Godzilla G-1, as it says on screen, but Godzilla -1, which is right up there with the first film as being the best in the series. I mean, magnificent achievements. My favourite film of last year, and a film I still think about quite a lot, just how brilliant it is, just how nuanced and layered it is. But we'll talk more about this when we talk about the Godzilla follow-ups. But I mean, these guys have been popular. They've never gone away. They've never not been popular. Kong and Godzilla. They've always been around in one form or another. And long may that continue. It may not be my Godzilla and Kong anymore, but I hope they keep going. I hope there's many more generations will fall in love with them as well. So.
I agree. And I think it's because they have great character. They are characters, right?
Yeah.
They're not just, monsters with the sort of blank slates. They're not like Michael Myers is. Even Godzilla, Godzilla maybe in some other movies does get made more of a kind of villainous character, but there's something about that original Japanese movie where you go, well, this was a creature that was disturbed, that lost its habitat because of all the nuclear testing, and it's just really pissed off, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
And again, like, you can't really blame him in a lot of ways.
He's a very, very, very big pissed off man.
Yes,
and he's, his testosterone's flowing. He's angry. He wants a bit of payback, and there goes Tokyo.
Yes.
But again, we bring it on ourselves, which again is a recurring theme throughout this series. We bring it on ourselves. If we hadn't been setting bombs off in his domain, we wouldn't have woken him up. I keep saying him. I've said this many times to people. I'm not entirely sure if Godzilla's male or female. I think he's always referred to as male, but there has been a son of Godzilla.
That's very good point. Very good point.
So there must be a Mrs. Godzilla somewhere, and Godzilla has died several times. So how do we know? Is this a male one? Is this a female one? Do they reproduce asexually? I mean, it's it's the kind of nerdy thing that keeps me awake at night. No one else in the world cares. But I lie awake at night worrying about things.
Well, I think King Kong is definitely male, right? King Kong is
definitely
actually,
male.
This is another kind of funny thing about some of these movies, is that sometimes they go a bit romantic, don't they? They go, the kind of the Beauty and the Beast stories, I suppose, that reoccur in this subgenre, where this kind of savage beast actually takes a bit of a liking to the heroine of the film, right? And that's always a kind of interesting thing.
The Peter Jackson version, I think, sort of plays up that element of it, perhaps a little bit too much, perhaps, but it's very odd. And people sit there, they wipe a tear away. Oh, he just fell in love with, and this is as pervy as hell. I mean, this is a film about bestiality, the consequences of which don't bear thinking about.
Yeah.
It's there. It's underlying this whole thing. Kong is an old romantic. Godzilla couldn't give a flying toss as long as he's got something to stomp on. He doesn't care. He's happy. But Kong, he just wants to settle down with a nice woman and sort of live his life and be cool.
Yes.
And don't we all? Don't we all?
Don't we all? Exactly. And I think 60s and 70s. We've touched upon the Birds and Jaws already, but this was when we really got that kind of boom of animal attack movies in the US, particularly, right, in kind of Western cinema. And I'm sure Jaws, the success of Jaws must have partly been to do with this, right?
Oh,
but
definitely.
That huge glut of everything from kind of piranha to tarantulas, the deadly cargo and frogs and all those movies, right? Like there was a real big boom of those types of movies in the 70s.
There were. I mean, the Birds didn't quite have the influence that I would have expected it to have had.
No.
But it was just slightly before Jaws, there was Willard about the rats.
Yes.
And its follow-up, Ben, and they were huge hits. So then, that begat Frogs, which came slightly before Jaws. But then Jaws came along and the floodgates opened. Every animal that you could think of was suddenly out to get us.
Yes.
And it's because it was such a brilliantly done film and a brilliantly timed film. It came out in the States in the summer months. So, of course, people were terrified of going to the beach because of it. And also because, the whole process of urbanization was pretty much done by this point. So many people had moved into cities, American cities in particular, had grown massively. And then suddenly there's nature.
Yeah.
And it's still there, and it's still bearing a grudge about all the things we did to it. So, I mean, you could do an entire series just on post-Jaws.
Yeah.
These films. I mean, there's all sorts of every animal you can think of. Name an animal. There's probably a film about it somewhere. Yeah.
I know. And of course, there was also there's a connection too, I think, to the popularity of disaster movies in the 70s as well, right?
Oh,
because you had stuff like Poseidon Adventure and Towering Inferno, and then movies like The Swarm, for example, with their kind of big ensemble cast. They also feel part of that kind of wave as well, right? They're all kind of connected, it feels
particularly something like the Poseidon Adventure, where you're battling the sea more than anything else. Once the disaster's happened, it's happened. There's not a lot you can do about it, but then he's surviving in an alien environment. And so yes, it is all part of that. And the environment is a huge part of these films, I think.
Yes, absolutely. They've got kind of people call them eco horror movies. They do.
And I think we saw some great ones in the 70s and early 80s from Australia.
Oh, didn't we just?
Which is a land which, for those of us on the other side of the world, always seems like simultaneously the most beautiful, most haunting, and the most absolutely terrifying place on earth. It's this vast continent where most of the population live around the edges, where all the sharks are. Really clever move there, guys. And it's full of insects and things that want to hurt you.
Everything
We've heard all those
you.
Stories about things coming out of toilet bowls while you're sitting on them. And I can't. And I love Australian horror films. They're real sort of specialty of mine. I absolutely adore them. And there was a wave of filmmakers, starting with, I think, Picnic at Hanging Rock, maybe a bit earlier, Waking Fright.
Oh, but I mean, speaking of perfect movies, right? Waking Fright. Oh my God.
And then Picnic at Hanging Rock, which I also think is a perfect movie. But in that, the monsters are more to do with the environments than they are to do with the people. The people are the products of their environments.
Yes.
Particularly in Waking Fright. In Picnic at Hanging Rock, they're strangers in the environment. They shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Which again is a recurring theme. But this whole idea that the outback is coming for you. And you don't go there. You don't mess. It's just
these are some of my favourite movies we're going to cover this series. I absolutely love these, and of course that wave of Ozploitation movies.
Yeah.
Long Weekend as well, right? I mean, again, if there was any film that perfectly encapsulates everything we're talking about this series, right? It's that film as well.
It's that film. Yeah. Again, one of those films. If you've never seen that film, go and watch it now. It's staggering. It is so good. It got so many bad reviews when it first opened. I never understood that. I never understood that. From the minute I saw it, I thought this is something really special.
It's really creepy.
It's
something to do with that subgenre, I think. I think critics get a little bit snobby. You know, we talk a lot about which subgenres tend to be more critically acclaimed than others, right? And I think animal attack movies definitely the lower rungs of the ladder, right, in terms of the prestige movies, I suppose.
Particularly in the UK, where I think we like to see ourselves as a nation of animal lovers.
Yes.
So, you know, we think, oh, yes, we're all at one with nature, aren't we? Isn't it wonderful? We got all this gorgeous countryside that we go out in, and so many people don't. Even people who live there don't tend to go out in the countryside that much, really. And it's like, well, yeah, I think sometimes it terrifies us that we've got this romanticised notion of what the natural world is like, and then the filmmaker comes along and waves something under our nose and says, no, it's scary as hell.
Yeah.
It's really terrifying. Don't mess with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, the movies we mentioned just now, Picnic at Hanging Rock and Wake in Fright, were more critically acclaimed. And I think that's because they were dealing with people, right? They were about the human condition. They were slightly more psychological, you know, but actually they fit just as well into this theme than some of the other movies we've talked about. You know, that idea of people versus nature. Picnic at Hanging Rock is exactly that, isn't it?
That's exactly that. They're in a place that they're completely out of their depth. They like to think, oh yeah, it's a nice little picnic spot, isn't it?
Yes.
But no, there's something else out there, and we never find out what it is that's out there. But they mess with it and they disturb it, and it comes and gets them and takes some of them away, you know?
And that's it. It's not just that all the animals in Australia want to kill you. It's the landscape itself too, you know, just the terrain, just the earth itself in that country wants to kill you. It feels like in so many movies, you know.
Even if it's not actively trying to kill you, it's doing you no favours at all. It's not helping you when shit happens.
No,
basically, you got to deal with the shit. Like something like, you know, sort of Wolf Creek.
Wolf Creek. God, yeah.
You got to deal with this psychotic serial killer in a very inhospitable environment.
Yes.
I mean, you know, it's a double threat, isn't it? You know, it's like if he'd been sort of wandering around Haddonfield, you kind of feel like I can lock myself in the house. I might get away with this. When you're in the outback, you've got nowhere to go.
Exactly. And actually, this is where all our subgenres tend to cross over and overlap, because there is something of folk horror, right, about these movies.
There is,
you know, that idea of isolated communities, the land, something historic and old and powerful in the landscape, in the earth, the soil. It all kind of crosses over here in the 1970s, doesn't it?
Something rising from the land, something ancient and old that we've lost contact with, we've lost touch with it, so we can't understand it. And so, that's it. Very much there is this kind of there's a massive Venn diagram, running right across the evolution of horror. With each sort of one in its own way, and everything intersects somewhere.
Yeah, usually in the 70s.
Usually in the 70s, because you know, everybody went mad in the 70s and just made the most amazing films.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And of course, as is always the way, and we talk about this every series, everything that they achieved in the 70s, then we get more of in the 80s. And it's kind of like, it's the same, but more. So in the 80s, we get Cujo, we get Slugs, we get, you know, whatever else, you know, all, you know, more kind of incredible, mad, wacky animal attack movies, you know.
And of course, I think it helped that, you know, sort of Jaws was still getting sequels.
Yes.
And although they weren't terribly good, they were making money. You know, so Jaws 2 comes along. I know what we'll do. We'll do piranha, we'll do alligator, we'll do something else involving animals that, you know. And Jaws was never out of circulation. I mean, I seem to remember going to see it at the cinema well into the early 80s.
Yes.
It always seemed to be there. He'd turn up every summer, you know, and excellent, go see it again. This, obviously, the days before video.
Yeah.
And so, it was quite the experience to do that. But I think it was there all the time. And every time it got reissued, it made a ton of money.
Yeah.
And so, of course, people are going to look at it and say, all right, I want a bit of that.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Yeah.
What about a brilliantly weird, bizarre, quite frightening film from 1981, Kev? Raw, with Tippi Hedren. Now that is...
Oh, my God.
That's real horror, right? Like
This is a snuff movie without any deaths in it. How do you describe Raw? I mean, it's this film that kind of... They decided... They lived with wild lions.
Yeah.
They lived with them in their house. This is, you know, Tippi Hedren and, you know, Melanie Griffith is in it.
That's right, her daughter. Yeah, it's basically
very young.
She and her family, right? Because it's directed by Noel Marshall, who I believe was Tippi Hedren's husband. Exactly.
Yeah.
He basically made this film in their home, they lived with a bunch of big cats that just roamed around their house.
Yeah, and so they decided they were going to make this sort of thriller film.
Yeah.
About them, and it ended up in absolute carnage. I mean, people were having chunks literally taken out of them by these lions, because these lions, you couldn't sort of shout cut and they'd say, how was that, darling? Good enough for you, I'll be back in my trailer. They would just like carry on doing whatever they're doing. There's a horrific scene with Melanie Griffith being attacked.
Oh my God.
Right, and she suffered terrible injuries, and you can kind of see the moment in the film. They left it in. You can see the moment where the pain hits her. It's unwatchable.
Yeah.
It's just awful.
Yeah.
Really, really bad. I remember showing it at a screening once, and I don't think I've had quite so many people groaning and looking away and walking out even during it, because it is quite an extraordinary film.
It really is. It's actually like you can't quite believe what you're watching, I think, when you watch it. And there's a brilliant documentary about it too, which kind of is just as interesting as the film itself. But Tippi Hedren may be the star of this series, right? Between everything that poor actress went through in The Birds and then in Raw, you think, my God.
You think she'd have learned a lesson, wouldn't you? Don't mess with animals. But I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to live with, the biggest predator on land that we know of.
Yeah.
And it is really scary. I mean, Jan de Bont, who was the cinematographer, later did, Speed or all the rest of it.
Yeah.
He was, was it him that got scalped during it?
Yeah.
And, he was filming something, and the lion just grabbed him and just took the top of his head off, basically. I mean, really unpleasant. I mean, it's one of those films where you're watching it and you're thinking, why am I watching this?
Oh, it's
This is where it stops being fun.
It does. And it's somewhere between watching like a nature documentary and a horror film, and there's something very uncomfortable about that experience.
It's one of those films I'm torn between recommending it and telling people to avoid like the plague.
Yeah.
I never quite know. Should you be watching this? I don't know. I mean, the filmmakers sort of were happy for us to see what was going on.
Yeah.
But it's so...
But you also think, don't you, should the animals be there? Like, you feel sorry for the animals, you feel sorry for the humans. Like, you kind of no one is having a nice time here.
It's the ultimate exploitation film, isn't it? Because they're just exploiting the wildness of these animals for entertainment. And it's I think it's a film that if you're strong of stomach, maybe watch it once, but don't ever expect that you need to see it again.
Yeah.
It's quite. I found it quite a disturbing film. There's very few films which really disturb me, to be honest. But that one, there's something icky about it.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I think in a different kind of way, I'm going to be pairing it with a much more recent film, but Werner Herzog's Grizzly Man as well, right? Again, a kind of, you're watching real footage of people thinking that they've got a handle on nature and these big animals, and then of course they don't, and it's tragic and chilling and creepy and horrible and sad, isn't it? They're
remarkable examples of the hubris of mankind.
Yeah.
Yes, we're top of the chain. We're in charge. Animals would do as they are told. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good luck. Yeah, you try and train a lion.
Yes.
All those things we used to see as kids, horrific things. They used to show this on television at Christmas. So the circuses with the lion tamers.
Oh God,
which were basically the handlers tormenting the lions to get them to roar, because they were quite placid. They were just, they didn't want to attack anybody. They'd just eat and they were quite fine. They wanted to go to sleep. But, this bastard was coming along with a chair and a whip and waking them up and all the rest of it. Yeah. And it's this appalling hubris that we have, that we can do that to animals and then they won't turn on us.
Yeah.
And, Raw and Grizzly Man are perfect examples of, these are idiots going out there, messing with nature. And guess what?
Yeah,
nature's not taking it anymore, and it's coming for you.
Yeah,
and,
nature's not fucking around.
Absolutely.
And of course, we get into the 90s, and it really makes a big comeback as a kind of repeat of the 70s, I think.
Yeah.
In the 90s, we have big, starry movies that natural disasters, animal attacks. We've got Arachnophobia. We've got Deep Blue Sea, Lake Placid. We've got movies like Twister and The Day After Tomorrow and Deep Rising. These kind of movies really made a big comeback. I wonder if that was linked to Jurassic Park, The Lost World, movies like that, know?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that Jurassic Park came out of sort of the book basically. It was an adaptation of the book. It wasn't part of a movement. It wasn't part of anything that's going on in the zeitgeist, as it were. It was a best-selling book. We want to make a film of it. But of course, it was a massive success.
Yeah.
And so everybody else thought, yeah, we'll have some of that. We'll have some giant monsters on the rampage. Let us not forget my favourite from the era, Tremors.
Yeah. Oh, Tremors.
Tremors.
Yes.
I mean, what a fantastic... And that, right there, that in that one film, is the epitome of a fun monster movie.
Exactly. It sums it up, doesn't it, I think?
It does, yeah. It's almost like they went back and watched every sort of 50s B movie they could watch, distilled down all the best bits from those films and thought, we'll make our own one now.
Yeah.
And we got Tremors. And boy, is that a good film.
So good.
Sequels, sequels less so, as is often the way. But the first one, masterpiece. Absolutely wonderful.
Incredible.
But yeah, these are all sort of part... maybe there was something in the air. I don't know. Maybe as we were approaching the millennium, maybe people were starting to get a bit freaked. We know people were getting freaked out as we got close to the millennium. But I don't know. Maybe there was something possibly. I don't know.
Well, I think that perhaps in the 90s particularly, right? And I don't know whether this has anything to do with it, but I think climate change, global warming really started to become a bit more widely a thing, right? And you had people like Al Gore and, it felt like, and I wonder if that links in with, we would in the early 2000s, we got The Day After Tomorrow and these big Roland Emmerich kind of spectacle movies where the earth just fucks us all, essentially, right?
Yes.
And like we got a lot of those kind of movies from the 90s onwards, really,
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, finally in the 90s, people started waking up to what people had been saying since the 60s.
Yes.
That we are heading for an absolute nightmare if we don't do something now. And that was when it, the whole sort of, eco movement really started to take off.
Yeah.
I can remember in the 60s, J.G. Ballard was writing books like The Drowned World and the Drought and things like that. So he was warning us, but it wasn't the right time. Suddenly in the 90s, we got a younger generation would come along and were really genuinely concerned about whether they were going to have a future, whether their children might have a future. Very, very scary moment, I think, for people. So, maybe that's where it all came from. It was just, we keep messing with nature, and nature's going to keep messing with us.
And I think it was that mixed with, there's this new thing called CGI. Now we can make big monsters without needing rubber suits, right?
Exactly.
But I think actually some of these movies have aged worse than the rubber suits, right? The snake in Anaconda looks like something out of a Commodore 64 game or something,
It does. It's terrible, frankly. And to be honest with you, we've mocked him earlier, but I will take Bruce the Shark over any of these CGI sharks that appear almost daily on Prime Video. I've noticed it seems like almost every day there's another bloody shark movie on there, and it's like millions and millions of them. You've got a whole season just there if you want. You just go and do shark movies. You'd be there for years trying to untangle that lot.
I know.
I think there's something, although, yes, he's very rubbery and he's a bit goggly-eyed at times. I think there's something much more frightening about Bruce because he was real. He was there on the set. Whereas one of the things I always find with CGI, and again, I may have mentioned this, forgive me if I have, that there's no weight to CGI.
Right, exactly.
You notice it a lot in the Marvel movies that, you have, somebody talking and then sort of they'll leap into the air and they sort of, it doesn't feel like they're there. There's a great quote from one of my favourite novels, Neuromancer by William Gibson, where he talks about cyberspace and describes it as there's no there.
Yes,
and that's what CGI is to me. There's no there. There's no presence. And, a lot of the modern, particularly shark films, are just not as frightening as Jaws because we get to see far too much of the shark and generally they're not very good.
Yeah.
And, I don't know. I think people should go back. As I said before, sitting on that boat, going backwards and forwards to the Isle of Wight, looking out the window and thinking, what is down there?
Yeah.
Is a lot more disturbing than, oh, look, there's a shark.
And of course, when Spielberg made The Lost World and Jurassic Park, he had real big animatronic models as well as CGI,
of course,
right? And that's why those films still look as good as they do, whereas movies like Anaconda and Lake Placid, not so much, I
can remember phoning my dear old late dad up one evening and he was watching Jurassic Park. He was on in the background. And he said, you know about films and all this stuff, don't you? And I said, yeah, well done, Dad. You've just noticed. Yeah. Excellent. Nice one. Okay. Yeah, I do. He said, how are they doing that?
Yeah.
And I had to try to explain to them, parts of it was CGI. It was animated CGI. Parts of it were like, when the head came into shot, it was, a proper giant head that they'd made. He could not get his head round it. could not get his head around the fact that they did this and they made it look like it was really there.
I mean, I understand where he's coming from. I still watch that film and go, God, how did he manage this?
How did they do that? I can remember seeing it at the cinema and the gasps that went around the cinema because no one has seen anything quite like it before. Just staggering. So, but then that's Spielberg, and they've got the best technicians in the world working on this. They've got the Phil Tippett's and ILM and all the rest of it. Whereas, the people who are making Sharknado, they've got the producer's cousin who's got a sort of fairly powerful computer at home and a copy of some animation program, and boy does it show something. It's one of the, I think it might be the first Sharknado film, which always makes me laugh, where they're driving along in a car and they keep looking out the window and there are sharks swimming next to them, but when you see the water it only comes up to about halfway up the wheel. How are they down there? How's this working?
That's amazing. I love
it's hugely entertaining, but it's not technically brilliant in any way, and it's sort of it opened the door to far too many cheapo shark films in particular.
Absolutely. And we got a lot in the 21st century of kind of cheap budget animal attack movies, but there are some great movies.
Yes.
Particularly in the 2000s, there are some, as is always, and we say this every series too, things got a little bit darker in the 2000s, a little bit bleaker, a little bit nastier. You get movies like The Descent, Neil Marshall's The Descent, right? Which I think, again, for me, basically a perfect movie. I think that the psychological horror, the claustrophobia, I could just watch a whole horror movie about caving, let alone the monsters. It's so terrifying.
Mind you say that there is an Italian film called Alien Terror, Alien 2, Alien on Earth, and that's all set in a cave, and trust me, you wouldn't particularly want to spend an hour and a half with that one. You really would.
Okay, maybe not. But that's a tremendous example of this theme too, because it's about women battling the elements just as much as it is the monsters, right? It's about an hour in before we even see the monsters in that film.
Again, it's a classic scenario. Here's a bunch of people. They're somewhere they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And they haven't got the good sense to get out when the things start to go. They stick around thinking, we're having a good time. No, go home. Go home, lock your door, go to bed, stay there.
Who on earth would choose to go caving? It's not something I would ever do.
I did once.
Did you?
I did once, and it was one of the most frightening experiences I've ever had. There was one section where they called it the pipe. It was like a tunnel.
Yeah. And
this tunnel was about half an inch less wide than my shoulders.
No.
So they sent everybody else in first, and they said one of the sort of guides, whatever you call it, was behind me. I went through it and I got stuck.
Oh God.
And I was starting to panic, and the guy behind me was not helping, saying we're going to have to keep moving because the air runs out in here if we stay in here too long. And I'm sort of trying to get. I was so traumatized.
No.
I've never been back in a cave again. I never will. Yeah. I've done some stupid things in my life, but that was probably one of the most stupid.
Yeah, that is exactly my worst nightmare. If I went cave, like that exact kind of thing, like getting stuck, running out of air. It's too dark to see anything.
Well, they did this one bit where they took us into this cave, this big cave, and they said, right, turn all your lights off.
Oh God.
And it was so dark, it hurt your eyes.
Yeah.
Because there's no light at all. I had to close my eyes, even in the dark.
God.
Because my eyes were hurting, trying to find something to focus on.
Wow.
In the dark. And it was horrifying. Honestly, I would not recommend it. Anybody who does it, I'm torn between total sort of, admiration for your bravery and just wanted to have you locked up. Because frankly, I think, we shouldn't be down there. It's like we used to live in caves and then we developed.
Honestly.
And we decided to come and live here instead.
I think most of this series, the next few months, is going to be me just going, well, why would anyone do that?
Why would anyone want to do that?
Why would you go to the outback? Why would you go to the rainforest? Why would you go to the caving?
I think at heart you're as much a city boy as I am.
Oh, I absolutely am. I absolutely am. Yeah. Although I did just go, I went on a US trip and we went on a swamp tour in Louisiana, and where I was on a little boat.
Yeah.
Mere sort of inches away from alligators that were swimming around us. I know, and even that, and this was obviously a very commercial,
Sure.
They have tour groups doing this every day.
Yeah.
So I was like, it will be fine. But even then I was like, we're very, very close to these alligators that are literally looking at us and are circling us in this little boat. And I just thought, nope, I shouldn't be doing this.
To be honest, I'd be just sitting there with every sort of, life raft you can imagine because I'm terrified of the water. I'd have all those on and I'll be thinking, that film Rogue, I remember seeing that.
Exactly.
Hang on a minute.
Exactly. Exactly. That's the problem, is that us horror fans, we all have films that we think of where we go, oh no, it didn't go well for them.
Why am I doing this? What am I doing? Did I learn nothing?
Even going skiing, I've seen that film Frozen where they get stuck on the ski lift. Another movie we're going to be talking about this series. Because again, there's a lot of these kinds of movies that, and I get it, that they must be quite easy to make in a way. Stripped back, low budget, high concept, open water, Frozen, movies like Buried or 127 Hours, where you've got a couple of people stuck in this kind of natural environment and they can't get out. That for me, it's making me stressed even thinking about those films.
Thinking about it, yeah. They're easy to make. They're also easy to make wrong, and we got very lucky with things like Frozen and with all the rest that you mentioned there, because they were extremely good. Open water is genuinely scary,
horrible.
And nothing happens in it.
No,
nothing happens in it, but it's genuinely frightening. And so, we got very lucky by having some incredibly talented directors who understood what they were doing with these films. I think it's quite easy because they're cheap as well.
Yeah.
You only have a couple of cast members,
so
and one location and all the rest of it. So it's very tempting for people to do that. And there have been plenty of knockoffs of them that I can heartily recommend avoiding.
Yes. Yeah, but when they get them right, those films are very powerful.
Yeah. Very disturbing.
A couple of other favourites from the last sort of 10, 15 years, to coincide with the kind of found footage era. We got a few found footage movies that deal with kind of people going out into nature with their video cameras. Troll Hunter, a great movie.
Fantastic
right?
film.
Fantastic
Troll!
Film. Yeah, so good. And a particularly kind of gruey one, The Bay, as well, from 2012.
I love The Bay.
Yeah.
I adore The Bay. I think it's one of the best found footage. I wouldn't even count it as found footage. I think there's this kind of neighbouring genre of fake documentary.
Yes.
Which is what this is.
The kind of Lake Mungo style,
That's right, The Lake Mungo isn't found footage, but it's kind of lumped in with it because it's kind of similar. But I think they're fake documentaries. And I think I prefer those these days to pure found footage. And this one is brilliant. Yeah. A very quick précis. As a young woman making a student film, or a student documentary for the television station. Yeah. And she's in Chesapeake Bay, which is notoriously one of the most polluted places on the planet. Yep. And people start turning up very dead in very nasty ways. And there's something in the water. And that's all I'm going to say. Go and watch it. It is staggeringly good. I think it's on Shudder or it's on Prime Video. It's on one of the streaming platforms at the moment.
Yes, and it really will, no pun intended, make your skin crawl, won't it?
It will,
It really will. It's quite gross,
And it's very clever because the grossness is kind of hinted at. Yes. You see little bits of what we're told is causing this, but it leaves a lot up to your imagination, which, of course, as we know, is the greatest weapon any filmmaker has. Yeah. They fill in all the gaps. And it's honestly, it's one of the films I would most highly recommend from this list, apart from the established classics.
Yeah, agreed.
Brilliant.
And I think in this last decade of, again, I would kind of think of this last decade as a time of quite prestigious highbrow horror movies. You think of Jennifer Kent and Ari Aster and Robert Eggers and Jordan Peele. Yeah. But quietly on the side of that, we've had, these kind of fun, quite well-made horror movies. Alexandre Aja has been making things like Piranha and Crawl, and you've got movies like The Shallows and 47 Meters Down. And actually, these movies continue. They just sort of, they're always there, it feels like. These animal attack movies, they continue. Like you said, it's almost like every day on Prime there'll be a new one. We are always still getting these animal attack, nature bites back movies, aren't we?
Well, the natural world isn't going anywhere just yet. It's ailing because of what we're doing to it. And, but it's still there. It'll always be there in one way or another, with or without us. And so I think, as we screw it up more and more, I think we're becoming more and more anxious about it. And so we're making more and more films about them. So, it's going to carry on. It's going to, there'll be a lot more of this to come, I think.
And of course, nature's biggest, our biggest sort of nemesis, I suppose, over the last few years has been a pandemic, has been a virus, which in itself is a kind of twist on nature, coming to get us, isn't it, in a way?
I'm not entirely sure I should comment on this because I seem to remember when we did that, I did say we would do a pandemic, and then suddenly we're in the middle of a pandemic. So maybe I should keep my trap shut for this one. But virus movies, and since COVID, there have been a lot of them. mostly low budget, mostly sort of, straight to streaming. But there have been a fair few of them. And I think, this is where horror and science fiction work so well, that they allow us to work through things.
Yeah.
Even at their shoddiest, even at their cheapest, even at their most exploitative.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when COVID struck and, that was it, wasn't going out anywhere and was working from home, I watched the whole of Terry Nation's Survivors. I watched Contagion. I watched, whatever was going. I watched it because it was a sort of a safety valve almost. That whatever's going on out there isn't as bad as what's going on the screen. Yeah. And if it does get that bad, I'm taking notes.
Yes, exactly that. But I think, I think you're right. Like, it's gonna be fascinating to see, with these things that are posing a proper existential threat to humanity, both global warming and pandemics. How is horror going to deal with these over the next few years? Are we going to try and ignore them and kind of go for escapism, or are we going to confront them in certain ways, in the way that Japan, confronted what they were going through in 1954 with Godzilla, I got
a feeling we're going to do both, which is like what they did with Godzilla. I think there will be escapist movies. There'll be sort of, zombie films are in a way kind of like viral films. They're pandemic films, aren't they? Far too many of them as well. But the good ones are, they're great escapism as well. But they also sort of, in a way, that the back of our minds sort of preparing us perhaps for what's to come. I'm feeling I'm wandering into this dangerous territory where I'm going to be saying in a minute, they're talking about a flu pandemic next, and it's going to be like,
don't you dare,
and everybody's going to come looking for me, aren't they?
You're forbidden to say anything is coming, anything bad. You're not allowed to mention World War III is around the corner.
It's going to be
anything
sunshine
else.
And rainbows for the rest of eternity. We're all going to live in paradise for the rest of our existence. Believe that. You'll believe any old nonsense, won't you?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well. But I think, it doesn't seem like this subgenre is going anywhere.
It's not going anywhere. No, it's not going anywhere. We will always have a complicated relationship with nature. We will always have a relationship, sometimes parasitic relationship with animals. Mm-hmm. Some people, not me, but some people will need them to survive, to eat. Some people just have them as pets because they're companionship and all the rest of it. Others, make other use of animals that probably don't want to go into, like hunting and all the rest of it. But we will always have that complicated relationship with the natural world. That's not going anywhere. Yeah. It's never gone away in all human existence. I can't see it's going to suddenly change. The hippie in me wants everybody to go, let's all just love nature overnight. It's great. We won't, because even I'm terrified of nature and I'm not going to go out in it. So, So, it's a very scary world out there. So, It's not going anywhere.
But there's still so much great escapism. Even as we speak, even as we record this, there's a new Godzilla and Kong movie out in cinemas right now.
As we speak.
Again,
absolutely.
This movie that is nearly 100 years old that we've just been talking about in kind of historic terms, we're still getting movies with those characters, which is unbelievable, really.
It's amazing. It's staggering, isn't it? I mean, it just speaks volumes about the lack of originality, but also the fact that these things do affect us.
Yeah.
They do live on with us the whole time. And particularly when you've got characters, like you said, they've got personalities like Kong and Godzilla. You can always bring them back. Who would have thought that they could have come up with Godzilla -1?
And also Godzilla finally won his Oscar as well. He got an Academy Award. Yeah.
Exactly. But, after all these years, they finally think, okay, let's go back a bit. Yeah. Let's go to, the first film. Instead of just keep you making sequels. Stroke of genius, absolutely brilliant film. So, they are still being made. They're still great. I reckon Steven Spielberg's probably got one more giant monster / revenge of nature film in him. I reckon he'll come up with something eventually. And long may it continue. I love them. Even the crap ones. I think I'd watch them over almost anything else, to be honest.
What a fun, well, I know, such a fun list of films to work through over the next few months. Have you got, and impossible, I'm going to finish with my usual impossible question that's going to annoy you, Kev, but what's your favourite out of all the ones we've mentioned?
Oh, that's not impossible. It's Jaws.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
It's a bit like when people say to me, who's the best Doctor Who? You'd have to say, well, it was Tom Baker, but my favourite was John Pertwee. Like, Jaws is Jaws is number one and a half, because it's not far behind. It's King Kong.
Oh yeah,
and then the birds.
Yeah,
they're just those. They're just so good.
They are.
There's so many. I'm looking at the list now that you sent me, and I won't spoil it for anyone, but. My God, you've got some good watching coming up soon.
Just some
you
absolute
really have
bangers. Yeah, absolute
amazing
bangers.
Films among that lot. So yeah, you're in for a treat.
And we haven't even mentioned Lewis Teague's Cat's Eye from 1985.
Probably for the best, to be fair. But...
Well, there you go. On that note, Kev, we'll leave it there. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And you'll be back in a few weeks to talk about Kong and Godzilla with me, which I can't wait for.
We're going to talk about the sequels, aren't we? Because Kong and Godzilla are getting their own, quite right, getting their own shows.
Exactly.
But we're going to be talking about what came next.
The wave that came afterwards. So that's going to be really fun.
I think you said to me in an email, in typical Muncer Lyons fashion, we're going to have to try and cover 50 years of films in about an hour.
Yeah, that's what we do together, right?
That's what
exactly.
we do, isn't it?
That's what we do. So I can't wait for that. But until then, Kev, just let people know, where can they find you and more of your work out there online?
I'm everywhere. I'm like a rash you can't get rid of. I'm all over social media. EOFF-TV, which is my website. That tends to be my username a lot of the time as well. I'm revamping EOFF-TV. It's beginning to look nice. It's beginning a whole new version of the site. There's EOFF-TV Review. If you look for that, they get my reviews on there. You can hear my dulcet tones on a few commentary tracks and all the rest of it, boring people to tears. I'm out and about all over the place, so come and say hello.
Amazing. Kev, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
A big thank you to the brilliant Kevin Lyons. Now, before we get into my discussion with Mary Wild, it's time to do some more thank yous. Now, during our hiatus, as I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, we launched our very own Evolution of Horror card game on Kickstarter. It's called Final Cut. It's a horror movie themed card game. The game was created by a friend of the pod, Alex Ayling, and it was illustrated by the very talented Mike Lee Graham. The three of us put a hell of a lot of work into this game over the last couple of years, developing it and getting it ready, and then we launched the campaign on Kickstarter. We set £10,000 as our goal, and we reached over £30,000, and over 900 of you backed the project. A huge thank you to everybody who backed the project, and we will be sending out your games and your rewards over the next few weeks and months. But the other thing that all backers were promised is that they would get given a little shout out on the main podcast as a thank you. So I've got over 900 people to thank for this Kickstarter project, so I'm going to split the shout out. I'm going to read out roughly 30 names per week across the next 30 episodes. So here come our first 30 backers that I would love to thank for supporting Final Cut. A big thank you to James Rodriguez, John Cairns, Richard Forder, Chris, Joshua T. Ruth, Joseph, Tim Farrell, Arietta Bryant, Robin F., Philip Hunt, Adam Greaves, Barbara DeMick, Natalie Bulmer, Julia Brown, Jordan Malone, Chris Rushbrook, Ali Pangborn, N, Daryl Nilbert, John Ruser, Jacques Molitor, Neil, Richard Nickvist Hoybach, sorry if I massacred that name, Justin Shilhanek, Jaws, Serena Hainsby, Brad Hanson, hello Brad, Stephen Last, and James Hart. A big thank you to all of those wonderful people for backing our Kickstarter campaign for Final Cut. More thank yous to come over the next 30 weeks. But for now, let's return to the second conversation of this week's episode, in which I was joined by the brilliant Freudian cinephile Mary Wild to discuss her thoughts on Nature Bites Back. Hello, Mary Wild.
Hey, Mike. How are you?
Hey, I'm really good, thank you. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. It's nice to be back.
So lovely to be back. You know, spring is in the air. This is the time when we can go outdoors, spend some time with nature, right? After a winter of being cooped up inside.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm really needing like a fresh start at the moment. So it is exciting.
Right, exactly. How is everything going, Mary? How's your 2024 been so far?
Yeah, pretty good. I've been working a lot, doing lots of teaching, and of course, finishing up my book.
Yes.
Yeah, so the final stretches of that, but everything is ticking along nicely, touching wood.
Excellent.
And yeah, exciting.
Very cool. So I would love to, as ever, just like hear a few initial thoughts from you on the kind of subgenre and the theme that we're going to be covering this season of the podcast. And I think it's going to be a nice it's going to be a nice change from last year because, from the kind of the claustrophobia, I suppose, of home invasion to the great outdoors, Mary. So we're going to be talking about sort of creature features, monster movies, and everything involving kind of like nature coming back to get us, essentially. What are your kind of initial thoughts on this sort of subgenre of horror?
Well, first of all, I have to echo your sentiment of the wonderful contrast from home invasion to Nature Bites Back. I love that kind of forward moving motion of, as you say, being cooped up and then suddenly like finding yourself outdoors is something you've been wishing for and craving, having this cabin fever thematically with the seasons. And you would think that you would find nothing but relief now being out there in the world, finally free. But yet, of course, there are horrors that await us outside as well.
Oh, my God.
Never escape the horrors. When I first saw your program for Nature Bites Back, I was stunned because I thought it was brilliant, really clever, brilliant design of like a mix of movies that depict scary animals, the ocean, all kinds of elemental threats. But also, as you say, like, sort of more monstrous projections. There's a lot here.
There's a lot, yeah.
There's a lot here, yeah, for sure. So I'm just loving it.
Amazing, yeah. So tell me, what do you kind of think of? I mean, I think we briefly might have spoken about this last year, but let me ask you again, Mary. Like, are you much of an outdoorsy person? Because I, for one, am terrified just even at the mere thought of going camping or something like that. Like, I am very much not of that world. What about you? Are you good at kind of being out there at one with nature and the elements?
Hell no. I am not at all an outdoorsy girl. I'm very much a city slicker. I love the comforts and luxuries of city holidays. I like 5-star hotels. I need to plug in all my hairstyling tools. Like, I can't, where am I going to put my makeup outdoor camping? No, absolutely not. I am not a fan of doing it myself. I don't do things like skiing or, mountain climbing or anything like that. But I do like exploring the symbolism of all this stuff in cinemas. I feel like I get to vicariously live out any kind of residual primordial fantasies of wanting to be out there in nature through cinema.
Yeah. And actually, I joke about how this is a nice little break from home invasion. I actually find some of these movies even more stressful to watch than home invasion. These kind of movies, these kind of like high concept ones where you've got like people stuck in the middle of the ocean or trapped in a cave or, stuck on a ski lift or whatever. Like, these movies actually I find incredibly stressful, because you kind of think to yourself, God, that is the sort of thing that would happen to me if I ended up going out on a boat in the ocean or something like that,
Exactly. I'm the same. I watch it and it's very satisfying in terms of like from a horror fan's perspective, because it's sort of like, it gives you that dopamine hit of getting scared.
Yeah.
That rush. It's very satisfying in that regard. But in terms of pure fear and anxiety, absolutely. Like, I do not find any comfort of like being stranded somewhere in nature. I find the idea actually of home invasion weirdly more reassuring.
Yeah.
You can sort of like tuck away in your home. You can at least have the pretense of like locking yourself indoors, shutting yourself in from outside. There's this sort of, even though of course you're never safe anywhere. We know that from home invasion. People always find a way to crawl in, But the point is, like, there's the illusion of finding security, finding reassurance and comfort inside your house.
Yeah.
When you're out there, you're literally at the mercy of the elements, animals, spiders, like
oh my God.
crazy people in the woods. Like, you're literally exposed. So
Yeah.
I'm like you, I find comfort more, actually, weirdly enough, in home invasion, because at least there's the illusion of safety.
I think you're right. And the illusion of control, I think, right? Like, I think when you're in your home, you feel like you've maybe got control of your surroundings. But there is the absolute loss of control, I think, right? When you're battling with nature and the elements, like what will be, right? I think, you know, we've learnt that, what feels like the hard way over the last few years, right? With pandemics, with global warming, it's like, no, we think we can conquer nature, but we absolutely can't, right? You know, it's going to come and get us, you know?
Exactly. Which feels so paradoxical, because we are also, you know, part of nature.
Yeah.
So it should feel like comforting to feel like all the barriers between us and the natural world are broken down, because we are natural organisms. You know, why aren't we more enmeshed with the natural world? So there's this weird push and pull between our natural instincts, which also Freud talked about a lot, because he was a neurologist. So something most people don't know, even though, of course, he's famous for being the father of psychotherapy, prior to inventing psychotherapy, he was a neurologist. He understood the nervous system very well, and, you know, really kind of anchored psychoanalysis in the field of biology. And he always believed that biology is destiny. So it's this weird ambivalent thing for human beings, being at once instinctually connected with nature, but also alienated from it because of our civilization.
Yeah.
So this in itself is great fodder for like horror films.
Totally. And I think let me come to some of these little, I guess, subcategories within what we're talking about. Like so now we're going to be talking about a lot of animal movies, and this is going to be fascinating to explore with you, I think, from a kind of psychological perspective, because this was something I was talking about with Kevin, is that we almost put we anthropomorphize almost. We always put personalities on different types of species and creatures, don't we? You know, like cats used to be kind of like worshipped as gods back in the day. And, you know, dogs are kind of thought of as like our best friends. And, you know, spiders are, for whatever reason, always the villains, like snakes are as well, right? And it's really interesting in the way in which these horror movies we're going to talk about this season kind of play into that, and often also subvert that as well, right? When it comes to different types of animals and the way they're depicted, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe through this style of like projecting characteristics onto animals, like imagining them the way that we do, and the way that they end up getting portrayed in our horror films, this is our way of bridging the gap that actually does exist between ourselves and other species, you know, because we really are unique, and we have a consciousness that appears to be different, and we seem to have reason, and there definitely is like a distinct difference between us and other species. And it is perfectly, I suppose, representative of our impulses that we would want to also like almost, I don't know, like produce these human characteristics and project them out into the wild, because that way does actually produce a sense of comfort and, again, a total illusion that we can predict how our natural environment will respond to us. If we can prescribe characteristics that are human-like, or have these like categories, or almost like diagnose different species of what they're going to do to us. It eliminates that sense of uncertainty that actually we don't know what the fuck these other species really think of us. And we don't know what the hell is going on in the ocean. Like, that is terrifying to a lot of people. So it is, I think the storytelling element does sort of like, in a way, create a buffer zone, like a sense of safety and predictability.
I think that's right, because even kind of, I don't know, kind of putting a morality on animals, because they don't have that, right? They're amoral. And I think to us, there's something even scary about that than if they are actually malevolent or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, they will just do what they need to do to survive, and you can't reason with them like you could a monster in any other horror subgenre, I suppose. And that in that way, that kind of makes them quite unique too, I think.
Yeah, for sure. But also the morality question is important as always this like reminder to us, something that we would want to repress, that maybe our own baser instincts are also amoral. And that realization is at odds with the way that we've structured civilization.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
our baser instincts are always fighting against the basic rules and order of civilization, which is something that Freud talked about a lot, especially in his book, Civilization and Its Discontents, 1930. It's like a real holy grail, a great companion piece to this season.
Interesting. And that does make a lot of sense, actually, that we are animals too, right? And that is something that we're all almost kind of afraid of kind of accepting, right? We kind of like to, again, it goes back to this idea that we like to think we're kind of better than or bigger than most of nature, when in fact we are not, right?
No.
I think, spiders. Now, in a recent study, spiders were, I think, in a survey, they came sixth in the most popular common phobias in the world. Why are we all so scared of spiders, Mary? It's so strange.
Oh my gosh. I mean, this is it's definitely a fear of mine. I know.
Is it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know my Projections podcast co-host, Sarah Cleaver. She's also very, very afraid of spiders. She probably has many more insights into that herself. But I think there might be something there. I mean, I'm just projecting here my own theory about the spider thing. Is obviously it does not look like the cuddliest animal out there. You know, like it's not the nicest creature to look at aesthetically. So there's that. That's just surface level. But in terms of what it actually does, you know, casting webs and catching its food in the web. But also having the power to like, it's not predatory in the usual way.
Yeah.
It's like, it's premeditated. It sets out its trap out first and then just patiently waits. And when something gets stuck in a portion of the web, it just goes towards that portion, eats the bug, and then reconstructs the web.
Yeah.
It's giving like premeditated murder.
Yes, that is so true, isn't it? Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's the psyche of a very like totally detached killer that is just always waiting in the wings and able to be completely unflustered even by the act of murder. The portion of the web that gets affected doesn't even destroy the entire web. The spider can just go back and reconstruct that one little portion and all will be calm as before. So all of this seems very, I mean, to me, it feels like if I were to put those characteristics inside a human being, I feel like it sounds like a very calculated person, very manipulative, very unbothered and detached from their act of violence. Obviously, it's not right to to sort of transpose those, as you say, moral problems onto an animal or a creature or a bug, because they have to do what they have to do to survive. I think it's just the method of killing that on some subconscious level is so calculated and premeditated.
That's such a good point. You're so right. It's like everything they do feels like a big a plot to murder something, doesn't it?
A plot.
Yeah, you're so right. Yeah. You're so right. And I wonder if that's also kind of similar with sharks too, another animal that is, has been so villainized in cinema that there have actually been kind of like activist groups, haven't there, that kind of are like, stop villainizing sharks. Because I know, it's so sweet. But something about that, maybe, like you said, it's the fact that the ocean is such an unknown, isn't it? And just the idea that there is this thing with teeth lurking beneath the surface where we can't see it, that's just kind of waiting for us to come in so it can get us. I don't know. There is also that kind of that feeling of something kind of lurking and waiting, I suppose,
Especially in a structure like the ocean where we can only see the surface, The ocean is a great metaphor for the unconscious, like the Freudian unconscious that, we take for granted, the ego personality, which we only ever see at the surface governing everything. But of course, that is a mistake, because the vast amount of the psyche is unseen. It's below the threshold of awareness. Therefore, it's like deep in the depths of something we can't even imagine. And that's what's really governing us. So a lot of what the ocean represents, again, is this kind of fear that we've worked so hard to repress, but it always, it comes sometimes like slipping back into consciousness through the representation of creatures like sharks. So we just put so much fear and project it onto these different elements, not necessarily even because of those natural dimensions, but because of our own inner nature.
Yeah. Do you think as well that we naturally, storytellers and society almost put like, it's like putting morals on, but they also put genders on to animals, certainly. It's like, I think spiders are often coded as female. I mean, even the names of them, things like the Black Widow and that kind of thing, right? And then you've got these more kind of like beastly type animals, whether it's something like in King Kong or whatever, that are often more coded as male, and actually to the point where they will even have kind of love stories or lust stories. When you look at King Kong or Creature from the Black Lagoon, they have these kind of almost Beauty and the Beast type narratives with the female heroine and everything. So I think that's kind of really interesting too, isn't it? The way that these movies kind of play with gender in that way.
Yeah, definitely. And again, all of those storytelling devices and the gendering of the creatures and animals is some way of negotiating with preconceived notions, biases held, maybe sometimes prejudices held against, let's say, genders. So everything I just said earlier about, the spider and why I believe it evokes so much fear and unsettlement and just a sense of uncertainty. I think it's a perfect way to describe maybe a femme fatale.
Yes, exactly that. Yeah.
And maybe something about the culture is trying to negotiate what it fears about women who, are actually in charge of their own destiny, like who go out, maybe even sexually, who are very in charge of their desires, and they go and seek out what they want. And sometimes, the man in the process of that gets hurt, and there's something depleted from him. This is all captured in the kind of imagination of what type of woman would do that? How could she be so cold-hearted and so premeditated in her actions?
I love this.
The same way as, as you say, King Kong, and how this is often coded as being very male, like aligned with male instincts.
Yeah.
Of like, just sort of like thrashing around, among skyscrapers, and then reaching into, an apartment block and grabbing a woman. This act of, it's very crude. It's very sort of like, it's not very elegant. Let's face it. It's sort of like a wonderful staging of the battle between civilization and baser instincts.
Well, there are some great moments in that original King Kong. It's a pre-code film, and there are some moments when you go, wow, like he starts stripping off Fay Wray's clothes, King Kong, and then like gives them a little sniff, like gives the clothes a little sniff, and you go, wow, what's going on here? It's really interesting.
Yeah.
But also, so you've got these animals that are traditionally always very scary, whether it's kind of snakes or spiders or sharks. But I think there are also these really interesting films that kind of recontextualize animals that we might see every day and suddenly make them scary. And I think Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, right, is such a tremendous example of that. As like a movie about something that we all see in nature every day, right? And just that idea of, oh my God, what would happen if these things suddenly turned on you in that way, and it's so tremendous, isn't it, in that movie, how he manages to make birds the most terrifying thing imaginable.
Yeah, it's so clever. And taking something, as you say, so benign, so ordinary, something that we would have never thought of before as a threatening creature out in the wild. And yet, the unsettling nature of the birds in this particular film, what they represent, I think much more symbolically and energetically is terrifying. Like, it truly is unsettling. And even to this day, if I pass by somewhere and there's like just a bunch of birds,
Yes.
on an electric line or something anywhere, I immediately think of Hitchcock.
Always.
That's so pervasive. And I'm looking forward to actually tackling the birds. I will be looking at that one in Wild About Horror, which I have to say, Wild About Horror this season takes on a whole other meaning.
Yes, it
does.
does.
In the wild.
Into the Wild. I love this.
Into the Wild, yeah.
And actually, speaking of Into the Wild, I mean, like, and this is probably no coincidence that it feels like the majority of films about the horrors of nature are set in Australia, right? the country where it feels like everything in that place is designed to kill us, right? Whether it's animals or just the landscape itself. There was a tremendous wave of films through the 70s, like Wake in Fright, Picnic at Hanging Rock, Long Weekend. These movies, some of them not specifically about animals or anything, but just, Picnic at Hanging Rock, just this kind of horror and awe and mystery of the landscape itself, right? And I think that's a really kind of interesting twist on this kind of theme, I suppose.
Yes, definitely. And I will be tackling that one as well as my second film in this season, because exactly to your point of sometimes there doesn't even need to be like a killer on the loose or an animal or creature or, spider, whatever, out in nature. It's just the vastness and the awe-inspiring kind of presence of nature itself that seems to cast a spell.
Yes.
For this, I really want to touch on the difference, like the philosophical difference between the notion of simply something being beautiful versus it being sublime. Because philosophically, a beautiful object is a benign object that you can simply admire and you can go about your day. It's small and it's manageable. But the sublime is a type of beauty that feels almost cosmic, as if it's to such a vast extent and beyond our imagining and comprehension as humans, that the simple gazing of the sublime feels like it might crush us. It feels like we might be engulfed by this thing we're observing. It feels threatening and dangerous. So it evokes horror elements. It is this kind of ambivalent thing of being both beautiful but also terrifying. And the Picnic at Hanging Rock really is a great example of that.
Oh, it's perfect, isn't it? Yeah, that almost kind of reminds me a bit of when we covered, sort of cosmic horror, right? That idea of kind of something being almost too big, too beautiful to comprehend to the point where it kind of makes our brains explode almost.
Exactly. That's exactly it. But isn't it really incredible that sublime cosmic vastness can also be perceived right here on Earth? It's not just in outer space. I mean, it's one thing, observing the rings of Saturn or something and feeling that energy, but to suddenly turn around and it's like, the edge of a cliff or the ocean or, a monsoon or something like that. It feels like there's no place even on our home planet to hide from the sublime.
Exactly that. And I think another really fun kind of twist on this sort of theme as well that I'm kind of touching upon is, I mentioned there where movies like The Birds take something kind of everyday and seemingly innocent and kind of twist it. And filmmakers have done that too with children, right? Movies like Who Can Kill a Child or The Children from 2008, these movies where, it doesn't even necessarily lend a kind of rational explanation, but it just kind of ponders the question, what would happen if children suddenly just turned on the world, and what would that look like? How would we deal with that? And I'm sure there is so much to unpick as a psychoanalyst, Mary, as to why there is something creepy about children, right? About small human beings.
Yes, absolutely. I was so stoked when I saw that you had programmed The Children. It's such a clever addition to the program because at the end of the day, children are as close as we can get to our primordial instincts before they're fully civilized.
Yes.
So they are still in possession of, more or less, I mean, depends how old they are, maybe. If they're very young, more so, but they're in possession of a set of instincts that society hasn't yet taught them to repress.
Right. Yeah.
And so these types of movies like The Children, for example, which I will be covering. I cannot wait to get into that one. These types of movies, in a way, are trying to explore the horror of really our own base human primordial instincts, if they still like untouched, still like undisturbed, more or less allowed to reign free. What it is that kids get up to, and why it is that it can be so unsettling. Myself, I am child-free by choice, mainly because I don't know, I just find the idea of maybe raising children, for me personally, like it feels a bit triggering for me, because I feel I've had a bit of a rough childhood myself. So I feel like I'm still parenting my inner child.
Yeah.
So I have, like I really like, I admire those among us who, as adults, are bringing children into the world and they're good parents. Like that's really needed. But I watched The Children, and there was this opening scene before anything bad happened, just like an ordinary scene, seemingly ordinary scene, where the the children come running out, and even just them coming out screaming, I was like, oh my God, that's so scary. Like,
yes.
Like it was just, it was filmed very deliberately. I knew that the director was trying to almost like dramatize something quite benign and ordinary that children do, and it was a kind of like foreshadowing what goes on later in the film. And I thought that was very clever. It's touching on baser instincts. It's touching on developmental processes that can be quite traumatic and painful.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I suppose it links to what you were saying earlier about how, there's this side of us that we, as we grow older and more civilized, that we kind of repress, which is that we are kind of animals that have animal instincts and amoral instincts. And I suppose when you're a child, you are closer to that, aren't you? You are closer to that, following your instincts, going with what your body and, sort of brain wants you to do, without any... Yeah, like you say, almost that kind of, without that kind of burden, I suppose, of kind of civilization or anything else being kind of put upon you. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, there's no interfering society yet at that point. They may already be teachings going on, but it hasn't fully settled and internalized yet.
We have had over the last 20 or 30 years, and I'm sure this is probably, pretty obviously down to things like climate change becoming a real visceral threat, that we've had a lot of natural disaster movies. We're going to be covering some of those. Also, filmmakers like M. Night Shyamalan have done really interesting things with nature, getting its revenge on us, whether it's, The Happening or Old, these kind of like strange, mysterious movies about mysterious places. And I think that's been a kind of interesting topic to look at, hasn't it? Over the last sort of 20, 30 years, how many films have kind of tried to grapple with what's happening to the planet, and coming up with ways to kind of put that in a genre movie, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. In a way, on some level, the collective damage that human beings are doing to our natural environment, even though it's so huge and it's such a massive burden on our conscience that it can't fully be perceived. Otherwise, it would just overwhelm us, like the level of danger that is in store for the environment. But nevertheless, just because we don't think about it every day and it's not part of our daily set of worries, it doesn't mean that it doesn't get registered somewhere on our unconscious. We are carrying the kind of like the marks of that guilt deep inside of us. And I think these particular films in the program that specifically deal with the anxieties of climate change, of human-made environmental catastrophe, of ecocide in some cases, that's a way for us to, like, in a way, reckon with that guilt, Yeah. And so it does come out in these horror movies, like, predictably, as a horror show, because and sometimes it may just be like science fiction. It might just be exaggerated for dramatic effect, but at the same time, it's worth investigating that level of storytelling just to kind of find out, not only are we hurting our environment, but we're damaging our psyches collectively too with the guilt and shame we carry connected with that damage. So it needs to be taken seriously.
For sure, yeah. And I think it's really interesting that, one of the biggest kind of natural, I guess, phenomenons that has kind of rocked the world over the last few years has been a pandemic, of course. And it's interesting in that the horror genre so far hasn't really dealt with that, and maybe we just don't want to deal with that. Like I understand that none of us particularly probably want to go see a horror movie about a pandemic right now. We still maybe not ready for that, We deal with it in other ways maybe, but I think that's going to be really interesting kind of going forward to see how that's going to be dealt with. And I think, generally it seems to be that most of these kind of nature horror movies from recent years have actually been more fun and silly and frothy. I think of like the Sharknado movies whatever. Like it's almost more like, because that threat is so dark and so real in real life, that we're sort of finding more fun ways and cathartic ways of kind of dealing with that in our horror movies instead,
Yeah, for sure. Because the comedy trope being thrown in a way, it sort of unburdens that heavy weight on the unconscious.
Yeah.
It makes it more palatable because it is so extreme that to all of a sudden, all at once, become aware of it and fully conscious of it, it would send most people into shock, I believe. So in a way, yes, the sort of, I mean, I don't know about like the Piranha movies and Sharknado, how subtle they are. They're not at all subtle, but you're right. It produces a cathartic effect, a sort of relief from the heavy weight that presses against, our psyche in relation to, completely connected to our relationship with nature. Our outer nature, but also our inner nature.
I love that. Well, there you go. I want to finish by asking you, so as ever, you're coming back to provide some of your excellent Wild About Horror segments. You've picked 10 movies from the list to focus on. Any films in particular, Mary, that you're most excited to kind of dive into and explore?
I mean, it was an embarrassment of riches. It's such a great list. I'm in love with all 10 that I picked. But I think the one that I'm really like desperate to get stuck into it is probably Arachnophobia.
Oh, God. Do you know that movie? So many people have asked me about that movie and asked if they could cover it with me. Like it's such a big one to so many people, isn't it? It's so interesting, and it's not even really like a. It's a horror film, I guess, but it's almost a kids' horror film. Like it's aimed at families, isn't it? But that film absolutely traumatized a generation of us, I think.
For sure. I saw it when I was a kid, like right around the time that it came out. I was a young child then, and I was quite traumatized by it. I already found bugs quite like, a bit creepy. It gave me the heebie-jeebies. But this, it just really got under my skin, and it just left an effect on me, which I'm more interested to unpack it for personal reasons than even necessarily aesthetically, strictly related to the film. It's more of a kind of like self-analysis, in that regard. So I'm so excited about it, Arachnophobia.
I can't wait to hear you discuss one of my absolute favorite, for me, 10 out of 10 no notes movie, which is The Descent from 2005 as well. Like, holy shit. Again, is there a more perfect film for this theme? Because that film is so stressful and terrifying, even before we get the monsters, right? But just like seeing all of these women who also, by the way, all have these like extreme sort of tensions between them anyway, get stuck in this dark claustrophobic cave for 90 minutes. It's just tremendous, isn't it?
It really is. Such a unique film, brilliant concept. Topographically is very psychoanalytic. And The Descent, I mean, that itself describes the kind of the movement that we do in psychoanalysis, which is to go within, and as you say, it's kind of like it is kind of like a masterpiece. I also don't have any notes. It's 10 out of 10 for me too. I saw it when it first came out and was blown away because it's one of those kind of films in horror that come out and it you think you understand what horror movies are, and then there's a brand kind of new stab at the genre, and it's entirely unprecedented. It's so provocative.
Yeah.
And that's what this did for me too. It's one of those films that I can name that really made me thirst and hunger for more horror.
Yeah, 100%. Me too. It kind of stands alone, you know, even from films coming out in that era. Like, it's so different and unique, and nothing has ever matched up to it as well. You know, it's just incredible. Yeah. Well, I'm so excited, Mary. We've got so much incredible stuff to explore over the next few months. It's going to be amazing. So you will be back very soon for some of your insights about many of these films we're covering. But until then, just let people know where they can find you, where they can find more of your work online.
Thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me back. It's always a pleasure and honor to come back and collaborate with Evolution of Horror. So iconic. I now am teaching with Morbid Anatomy, and you can find information about that if you follow me on my socials, which is my handle is Psychstar, PSYCSTAR, on Twitter, X, and Instagram. And as ever, I'm producing exclusive content on Patreon, and you can find me on patreon.com/Mary Wild.
Amazing. Mary, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
And that's it for this week. God, it's good to be back. Thank you so much for listening. And one more time, a huge thank you to my two brilliant guests who are always here with me every step of the way on these journeys every year, Kevin Lyons and Mary Wild. So I would love to hear your thoughts. What are your feelings on the subgenre that we're going to be covering this series? What are some of the films that you're most looking forward to? What are you hoping we're going to cover? Please do get in touch. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com, and you can find us on all the socials, of course, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. You can join the discussion group on Facebook, or you can join our Discord if you want to discuss this week's episode with fellow listeners. And if you want to keep abreast of events that we've got coming up, new merchandise, new products, sign up to our newsletter, evolutionofhorror.com/newsletter. You can find this podcast in all the usual podcast places, and if you get a spare minute, I'd be so grateful if you could drop us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, as that really helps us get discovered by new listeners. So, next week, our deep dive discussions begin, and it's a big one next week, quite literally a beast of a movie to discuss. Next week, I'm going to be joined by the brilliant James Swanton, and we are going to be kicking off this series by discussing one movie and one movie only, and that is King Kong from 1933. There's going to be a lot to discuss. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.